Hey there, and welcome. Tonight, we journey back into a world far colder, harsher, and stranger than our own. A world where survival was not guaranteed, and where life itself clung on by sheer resilience. This is the story of the Ice Age, an age when vast glaciers smothered continents, seas shrank and shifted, and every living thing had to adapt or vanish. Imagine standing on a frozen plain, where the wind cuts like blades, and the horizon is nothing but ice. Towering mammoths lumber through the snow. Saber-toothed cats stalk in the shadows. Small bands of humans huddle around fragile fires, their very lives depending on ingenuity, courage, and the luck of the hunt. Beneath the frozen oceans, whales and seals navigate a hidden, thriving world, while in valleys shielded from the cold, tiny plants and seeds lie dormant, waiting for warmth to return. The Ice Age was not one long winter, but a cycle of cold and warmth, advancing glaciers and retreating seas. It shaped mountains, carved valleys, and rewrote the geography of Earth. It gave rise to incredible beasts, inspired the first human art, and left scars and legacies that we still carry today. Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover how megafauna thrived, how tiny creatures found ways to endure, how humans struggled, invented, and triumphed, and how eventually both climate and humanity brought the great Ice Age to an end. This isn't just history. It's the story of survival against impossible odds. So settle in, let your imagination drift into the cold, and step with me into the frozen world that almost lasted forever. The wind whispers across a barren plain, its breath cold enough to sting exposed skin and freeze the moisture in the air into tiny crystals that drift like ash. Beneath this sky-pale, endless, and silent earth lies locked in ice. Vast glaciers stretch from horizon to horizon, their surfaces grooved and cracked like the skin of ancient giants. Mountains wear crowns of snow that never melt. Rivers are frozen in place, their currents stilled beneath layers of ice, so thick they seem eternal. This is the frozen world, a planet gripped by the ice ages, where survival is not a given, but a daily negotiation with cold, scarcity, and time. It is a world of extremes. The sun rises low and weak, casting long shadows across tundra and ice fields. Even at midday, its warmth barely penetrates the atmosphere, and the land remains cloaked in frost. Snow falls not in gentle flurries, but in sweeping blizzards that erase the landscape, burying valleys and forests beneath meters of powder. The air is dry, paradoxically, for cold holds little moisture. The silence is profound, broken only by the groan of shifting ice or the distant crack of a glacier calving into a frozen sea. During the peak of the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. In places, they reached over 3 kilometers thick, pressing down on the crust of the earth, reshaping coastlines, rerouting rivers, and carving deep fjords and valleys. Sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters, exposing vast land bridges between continents, corridors for migration, for exploration, for escape. Australia, now an island continent, was connected to New Guinea. Siberia and Alaska were joined by the Bering Land Bridge, a frozen highway for mammoths, wolves, and the first humans to cross into the Americas. But this world was not lifeless. Beneath the ice, around its edges, and in the pockets of land left untouched by glaciers, life endured. It adapted, evolved, and persisted. In the frozen north, tundra ecosystems flourished, windswept plains dotted with hardy grasses, mosses, and lichens. These plants clung to the soil, drawing what little warmth and moisture they could from the permafrost below. They fed herds of woolly mammoths, steppe bison, and musk oxen, whose thick coats and massive bodies were built for the cold. These animals roamed in great numbers, their migrations shaping the land, their dung fertilizing the soil, their presence sustaining predators like saber-toothed cats and dire wolves. In the forests that survived along the ice margins, Conifers dominated spruce, pine, and fir trees that could withstand the long winters and short summers. Beneath their branches, smaller mammals burrowed into the snow, seeking shelter and warmth. Snowshoe hares, with their oversized feet and seasonal camouflage, darted between shrubs. Lynx and foxes followed, their keen senses tuned to the faintest rustle. Birds, too, persisted ptarmigans and owls, their feathers thick and silent, their eyes sharp in the dim light. Further south, in regions spared from glaciation, temperate forests and grasslands offered refuge. These were the sanctuaries of survival, where species retreated during the coldest periods, and from which they expanded again when the ice began to melt. In these pockets, evolution accelerated. Plants adapted to shorter growing seasons and colder soils. Animals developed new behaviors, new diets, new strategies. Some hibernated, slowing their metabolism to wait out the winter. Others migrated, following the sun and the warmth. Still others changed form, growing thicker fur, storing fat, altering their reproductive cycles to match the rhythms of the frozen world. The oceans, too, bore the mark of ice. With so much water locked in glaciers, sea levels fell, exposing vast continental shelves. Coral reefs died back, unable to survive the cooler temperatures and lower light. But in the deeper waters, life continued. Cold-adapted fish, plankton, and marine mammals thrived in nutrient-rich currents. Seals and whales followed the ice edge, feeding on krill and fish that bloomed in the upwelling zones. Polar bears, newly evolved, hunted seals from the ice, their white fur blending perfectly with the snow-covered landscape. And beneath the ice, in places where geothermal heat warmed the ground, life found even more surprising footholds. In caves, in deep lakes, in hydrothermal vents, ecosystems flourished in isolation. Microbes adapted to darkness and pressure, feeding on minerals and chemical energy. These hidden worlds were untouched by the cold above, and they remind us that life is not easily extinguished. It finds a way, even in the most inhospitable places. The climate of the ice ages was not static. It shifted in cycles, driven by changes in Earth's orbit, tilt, and wobble known as Milankovitch cycles. These subtle variations altered the amount of sunlight reaching the planet, triggering periods of glaciation and interglaciation. Over tens of thousands of years, ice sheets advanced and retreated, carving the land anew each time. Forests grew, then died back. Rivers changed course. Species expanded, then vanished. It was a world in flux, a planet constantly reshaping itself in response to cosmic rhythms. For those who lived through it, whether mammoth or moss, wolf or willow, the struggle was constant. Survival meant adaptation, resilience, and sometimes migration. It meant finding warmth in the cold, food in the scarcity, shelter in the storm. It meant evolving, not just physically, but behaviorally. Herds moved with the seasons. Predators learned to hunt in snow. Plants timed their growth to the brief summer sun. And when the ice began to melt, when the glaciers retreated and the rivers flowed freely again, life surged forward, reclaiming the land with astonishing speed. The legacy of the ice ages is written across the earth, in the shape of valleys and fjords, in the layers of sediment beneath lakes, in the DNA of species that still carry the marks of cold adaptation. It is a story of endurance, of transformation, of the quiet power of life to persist against all odds. As you drift into sleep, let this frozen world unfold around you. Picture the slow march of glaciers across the land, the hush of snow falling on ancient forests, the distant call of wolves beneath a pale moon. Imagine the resilience of moss clinging to stone, the warmth of a mammoth calf nestled against its mother, the flicker of firelight in a cave where early humans huddled for warmth. Let the rhythm of ice and time carry you into dreams of survival and change, of a planet sculpted by cold and awakened by life. This is the frozen world, vast, beautiful, relentless, and alive. The Earth breathes in long, slow rhythm cycles of ice and warmth that have shaped its landscapes and life for millions of years. These are not sudden shifts, but deep pulses of climate change that unfold over tens of thousands of years, driven by forces far beyond the reach of weather or seasons. To understand the ice ages, we must step back and listen to the planet's quiet metronome, the subtle dance of Earth as orbit, tilt, and wobble. It begins with sunlight, not the daily rise and fall we know, but the way sunlight reaches Earth over millennia. Our planet doesn't orbit the sun in a perfect circle. It moves in an ellipse, and that ellipse changes shape over time. Sometimes it's nearly circular, and sometimes it stretches out, bringing Earth closer to the sun at one end and farther away at the other. This cycle, called eccentricity, takes about 100,000 years to complete. When the orbit is more elongated, seasonal contrasts can intensify, especially in the hemispheres tilted away from the sun. But eccentricity is only part of the story. Earth also tilts on its axis currently at about 23.5 degrees, but that tilt isn't fixed. Over roughly 41,000 years, it shifts between about 22 and 24.5 degrees. This change, known as obliquity, affects how much solar energy the poles receive. A greater tilt means more extreme seasons, hotter summers, colder winters. A smaller tilt brings milder seasons, which can allow snow and ice to persist through summer, slowly building glaciers year after year. Then there's precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, like a spinning top losing momentum. Over 26,000 years, this wobble changes the timing of the seasons relative to Earth's position in its orbit. When northern summer occurs at the farthest point from the sun, it's cooler. When it happens at the closest point, it's warmer. This subtle shift can tip the balance between ice growth and ice melt. Together, these three cycles, eccentricity, obliquity, and precession, are known as Milankovitch cycles, named after Serbian scientist Milutin Milankovic, who first proposed their role in climate change. These cycles alter the distribution and intensity of sunlight across the planet. They don't change the total amount of energy Earth receives, but they change where and when it arrives. And that matters deeply, especially in the high latitudes where ice sheets form. When summer sunlight weakens in the northern hemisphere, snow from the previous winter may not fully melt. Over time, this leftover snow compacts into ice. As more snow accumulates, glaciers grow, spreading across continents and reflecting sunlight back into space. This reflection cools the planet further, reinforcing the cycle. Oceans respond to cooling, absorbing more carbon dioxide and lowering greenhouse gas levels. The atmosphere thins, the climate dries, and deserts expand. The Earth enters an ice age, but the rhythm doesn't hold forever. Eventually, the cycles shift. Summer sunlight strengthens, melting ice and exposing darker land and water that absorb heat. Carbon dioxide rises from warming oceans, amplifying the thaw. Forests reclaim tundra, rivers swell with glacial melt, and sea levels rise as ice sheets retreat. The planet warms, and life surges forward into a new interglacial period. These transitions are not smooth, they come with pulses and pauses. Sometimes ice sheets collapse suddenly, releasing floods of cold water into the oceans and disrupting global currents. Sometimes warming stalls and glaciers advance again. But over the long arc of time, the pattern holds. Cold gives way to warmth, warmth to cold, in a cycle as old as Earth itself. In the last 2.6 million years, the Quaternary period, this rhythm has repeated dozens of times. The most recent ice age peaked around 20,000 years ago, when glaciers covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. Then, as orbital conditions shifted, the ice began to melt. Forests spread, animals migrated, and humans new to the scene followed the retreating ice into fertile valleys and open plains. Today, We live in an interglacial period known as the Holocene. It's been unusually stable, allowing civilizations to rise and flourish. But the cycles continue. The planet still tilts and wobbles. Its orbit still stretches and contracts. Left to its own devices, Earth would likely cool again in the distant future, beginning another slow descent into ice. Yet now, a new force has entered the equation: human activity. By burning fossil fuels, clearing forests, and altering the atmosphere, we've added greenhouse gases at a pace far faster than any natural cycle. The rhythms of ice and warmth, once governed by celestial mechanics and slow feedbacks, now face a new conductor. The future of Earth's climate will still be shaped by its ancient cycles, but also by the choices we make today. As you drift into sleep, imagine the quiet turning of the planet, the slow shift of its axis, the long sweep of its orbit. Picture glaciers growing and melting, forests advancing and retreating, oceans rising and falling in time with the sun. These are the rhythms of ice and warmth, deep, patient, and powerful. They remind us that Earth is not static, but alive with motion, and that climate is not a moment, but a story written across millennia. The world once wore a crown of ice. Imagine standing on a windswept ridge, the air thin and sharp, the land stretching out in frozen silence. Beneath your feet, the rock is grooved and polished, etched with the memory of a glacier that passed this way thousands of years ago. The valley below is wide and U-shaped, its walls steep and smooth, carved not by rivers, but by the slow, relentless movement of ice. This is the legacy of the Ice Ages, a planet reshaped by frozen giants, where landscapes were sculpted, rivers rerouted, and seas pulled back to reveal hidden continents. Glaciers are not static. They are rivers of ice, flowing under their own immense weight, grinding and gouging the land as they move. During the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, ice sheets covered vast portions of North America, Europe, and Asia. In places, they were more than 3 kilometers thick, pressing down on the crust, deforming it, and carving out the terrain we know today. Mountains were sharpened into jagged peaks, valleys deepened into fjords, and plains flattened into tundra. As glaciers advanced, they acted like colossal bulldozers, plucking rocks from mountainsides and dragging them for miles. These rocks, some the size of houses, were deposited far from their origins, left behind as erratics when the ice melted. Beneath the ice, the bedrock was scoured and smoothed, leaving behind striations that still mark the stone. In alpine regions, cirques formed amphitheater-like hollows where glaciers once gathered. Arates and horns rose between them, knife-edged ridges and pyramid-shaped peaks, sculpted by ice from multiple directions. Rivers, too, were transformed. Before the glaciers came, many rivers followed gentle courses across the land. But as ice sheets grew, they blocked and redirected these flows. Some rivers were dammed by ice, forming vast glacial lakes. Others were forced into new paths, carving out gorges and canyons as they adjusted to the changing landscape. When the ice finally retreated, meltwater surged through these channels, deepening valleys and depositing layers of sediment that still shape floodplains today. One of the most dramatic effects of the Ice Ages was the lowering of sea levels. As glaciers grew, they locked up vast amounts of water, enough to drop global sea levels by more than 100 meters. Coastlines retreated, exposing continental shelves and creating land bridges between regions now separated by ocean. The Bering Land Bridge connected Siberia to Alaska, allowing animals and early humans to migrate into the Americas. Australia was joined to New Guinea, and Britain was connected to mainland Europe. These bridges were highways of life, corridors for movement and exchange. The exposed seafloor was not barren. It became grassland, tundra, and forest, supporting herds of mammoths, reindeer, and horses. Predators followed wolves, lions, and saber-toothed cats. In these now submerged landscapes, ecosystems flourished, adapting to the cold, and the shifting terrain. When the ice melted and the seas rose again, these lands were drowned, their stories buried beneath the waves. Glacial melt reshaped the land in other ways, too. As ice sheets retreated, they left behind moraines, ridges of debris that marked the glacier's former edge. Eskers formed as meltwater rivers flowed beneath the ice, depositing long, winding ridges of sand and gravel. Kettle lakes appeared where blocks of ice were buried in sediment and later melted, leaving behind depressions filled with water. Outwash plains spread beyond the glaciers, layered with sediment carried by meltwater streams. In regions like Scandinavia and Canada, the weight of the ice depressed the land. When the glaciers melted, the crust began to rebound, a process still ongoing today. This isostatic rebound has lifted shorelines, altered drainage patterns, and created new lakes and wetlands. It's a reminder that the Earth is not fixed, but elastic, responding to the pressures of ice and time. The fingerprints of glaciers are everywhere. In the Great Lakes of North America, carved by ice and filled by meltwater. In the fjords of Norway and New Zealand, deep valleys flooded by rising seas. In the drumlins of Ireland and the northeastern United States, teardrop-shaped hills molded by flowing ice. In the lowest plains of China and Europe, fine silt blown from glacial outwash and deposited in thick blankets. Even today, glaciers continue to shape the land. In places like Greenland, Antarctica, and the high Himalayas, ice still flows, still carves, still transforms. As climate warms, these glaciers are retreating, revealing landscapes hidden for millennia. The meltwater feeds rivers, nourishes ecosystems, and contributes to rising seas. The story of ice is not over. It is still being written, in every valley, every shoreline, every shifting current. As you close your eyes and drift into sleep, imagine the slow passage of ice across the land. Hear the groan of glaciers moving, the rush of meltwater carving new paths, the silence of a world held in frozen breath. Picture mountains sharpened by frost, rivers reborn in thaw, seas retreating to reveal forgotten lands. Let the rhythms of ice and time carry you into dreams of transformation, of landscapes shaped by cold and revealed by warmth. This is the story of frozen landscapes and shifting seas, a tale of power, patience, and change. A reminder that Earth is a sculptor and ice its chisel. The wind moves slowly across the tundra, brushing against the coarse fur of a creature that no longer walks the earth. The light is pale, filtered through a sky heavy with ice crystals, and the land stretches out in silence, broken only by the crunch of snow under massive feet. This is the world of the Pleistocene, a time when giants roamed the earth, shaped by cold, sustained by resilience, and woven into the fabric of a frozen planet. It is a world of woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, and countless other creatures whose lives were defined by the rhythm of ice and survival. The cold was not just a backdrop, it was the sculptor of life. Temperatures dropped, glaciers advanced, and ecosystems shifted. Forests gave way to open steppe, and deserts expanded under dry, frigid skies. In this harsh environment, only the adaptable endured. Woolly mammoths were among the most iconic of these survivors. Towering over modern elephants, they were built for the cold. Their thick coats consisted of 2 layers, a dense underfur for insulation and long, shaggy guard hairs that repelled moisture and wind. Beneath their skin lay a thick layer of fat, sometimes up to 10 centimeters deep, acting as a thermal blanket against the chill. Their ears were small and rounded, minimizing heat loss, and their trunks were powerful tools for foraging, capable of sweeping aside snow to uncover buried grasses and sedges. Mammoths were more than just grazers. They were ecosystem engineers. As they moved across the tundra, they trampled shrubs, fertilized soil with dung, and opened up landscapes for grasses to flourish. Their migrations shaped the land, creating corridors of life in a world otherwise dominated by ice. Calves stayed close to their mothers, learning the paths of survival, the locations of seasonal forage, and the dangers of predators. Herds were matriarchal, led by experienced females who guided their kin through blizzards and across frozen rivers. When threatened, the herd formed a defensive circle, tusks outward, protecting the young in the center. In the shadows of these herds, predators waited. The saber-toothed cat, Smilodon fatalis, was a master of ambush. Unlike modern big cats, it was built for power rather than speed. Its forelimbs were massive, capable of grappling prey to the ground, and its jaws housed the iconic saber-teeth elongated canines that could reach up to 20 centimeters. These teeth were not tools of brute force, but of precision. Smilodon didn't chase prey across open plains. It stalked, waited, and struck with explosive power. Using cover and stealth, it closed the distance, leapt with muscular grace, and used its forelimbs to pin its target. Then, with a swift, downward thrust, it drove its sabers into the throat or belly, severing arteries and ending the hunt quickly. Its prey included bison, camels, and juvenile mammoths. But Smilodon was not an indiscriminate killer. Energy conservation was key in the cold. A failed hunt could mean starvation. Fossil evidence suggests that these cats may have lived in groups. Injured individuals show signs of healing, implying care from others. If true, Smilodon was not just a predator, it was a companion, bound by blood and survival. Farther south, where the ice gave way to temperate forests and open woodlands, another giant roamed. The giant ground sloth, Megatherium, was a gentle titan. Standing over 6 meters tall when rearing on its hind legs, it moved slowly and deliberately, conserving energy in a world where food was often scarce. Its body was massive, covered in coarse fur, with long claws that curved like scythes. Despite its fearsome appearance, it was a browser, feeding on leaves, fruits, and soft vegetation. Adapted to cooler climates, ground sloths had slow metabolisms and thick hides. Their size helped retain heat, while their claws allowed them to pull down branches and strip bark. Ground sloths were solitary, wandering through forests and grasslands in search of food. They dug burrows to escape the cold, some large enough to shelter multiple individuals. Their presence shaped the landscape. They dispersed seeds, cleared underbrush, and created pathways through dense vegetation. Though slow, they were formidable when threatened. A swipe from their claws could deter predators, and their bulk made them difficult to bring down. They were part of a delicate balance prey for large carnivores, but also keystone herbivores that maintained the health of their ecosystems. The megafauna era was not just a parade of impressive creatures. It was a complex, interwoven system. Mammoths grazed the tundra, keeping grasses dominant. Sloths browsed forests, shaping plant communities. Saber-toothed cats controlled herbivore populations, preventing overgrazing. Wolves, bears, and scavengers followed in their wake, feeding on leftovers and maintaining the cycle of life and death. Climate dictated everything. Winters were long and brutal, summers short and intense. Plants adapted with rapid growth cycles, deep roots, and frost-resistant tissues. Animals evolved thick coats, fat reserves, and behaviors tuned to the rhythm of the seasons. Migration was essential following the sun, the melt, the bloom. Even insects played their part. Beetles, flies, and moths pollinated plants, decomposed dung, and fed birds and small mammals. Their populations rose and fell with the temperature, creating pulses of activity that echoed through the food web. The Ice Age was a crucible of evolution. Species that survived did so by changing physically, behaviorally, genetically. Mammoths evolved from earlier elephants, their bodies reshaped for cold. Saber-toothed cats refined their hunting tools. Sloths grew larger, slower, more efficient. Some adaptations were subtle, changes in fur density, in blood chemistry, in reproductive timing. Others were dramatic. New species emerged, old ones vanished. The cold was not just a challenge, it was a sculptor, carving life into forms that could endure. Isolation played a role too. As glaciers advanced, populations were cut off, evolving separately. This led to diversity-different mammoth species in Europe and North America, unique sloths in South America, varied predators across continents. Each adapted to its niche, its climate, its prey. Around 12,000 years ago, the ice began to retreat. Temperatures rose, glaciers melted, and ecosystems shifted. Forests expanded, grasslands shrank, and the giants faced new challenges. Some adapted, others did not. Human arrival added pressure. Hunting, habitat change, and competition accelerated extinctions. Mammoths vanished from the mainland, surviving only on isolated islands for a few thousand years. Saber-toothed cats disappeared, their prey dwindling. Ground sloths retreated, then faded, but their legacy remains. In bones buried beneath tundra, in DNA preserved in permafrost, in the shape of valleys they walked, the plants they fed, the predators they challenged. The megafauna era is gone, but its echoes still ring through the land. The earth remembers. In every valley carved by tusks, in every fossil buried in frost, in every whisper of wind across the tundra, their story lives on. As you drift into sleep, imagine the crunch of snow beneath mammoth feet, the silent stalk of a saber-toothed cat, the slow sway of a ground sloth beneath a frost-touched tree. Picture the cold, the wind, the stars above a world ruled by giants. Let their stories carry you into dreams of survival, of adaptation, of life shaped by ice and time. This was the megafauna era, an age of wonder, of resilience, of life at its largest and most enduring. And though the ice has melted and the giants have gone, the earth remembers. In the bones of the land and the rhythm of the seasons, in the quiet places where snow still falls and wind still whispers, their legacy endures. The snow falls softly, blanketing the forest floor in silence. Beneath the hush of winter, life continues not in grand migrations or towering herds, but in the quiet persistence of the small. Insects, small mammals and birds, often overlooked in the shadow of megafauna, have mastered the art of survival in cold. Their strategies are subtle, ingenious, and deeply woven into the rhythm of the seasons. In the frozen world of the ice ages, these tiny survivors found niches, carved out shelter, and adapted in ways that allowed them not only to endure, but to thrive. As the temperature drops and the days shorten, insects begin their transformation. Some vanish from sight entirely, retreating into soil, bark, or leaf litter. Others remain visible, moving slowly, their bodies hardened against the cold. Many insects enter a state known as diapause, a kind of suspended animation where growth and development halt. Metabolism slows to a whisper, and the insect waits. Diapause can occur in eggs, larvae, pupae, or adults, depending on the species. It's not sleep, it's survival. Ants, for example, retreat deep into their nests below the frost line. Their colonies become quiet chambers of patience, where workers huddle together, sharing warmth and conserving energy. Bees form tight clusters inside their hives, vibrating their flight muscles to generate heat. The queen remains at the center, protected by the living insulation of her workers. Outside, snow piles high, but inside the hive, the temperature remains just warm enough to sustain life. Some insects produce their own antifreeze compounds, like glycerol and sorbitol, that prevent ice crystals from forming in their cells. These cryoprotectants allow them to survive temperatures that would kill most other organisms. The woolly bear caterpillar, for instance, can freeze solid in winter and thaw in spring, continuing its life as if nothing happened. It spends years in this cycle, growing slowly, enduring the cold, until finally pupating and emerging as a moth. Others take to the air, even in winter. Snow fleas, which are not fleas at all, but springtails hop across the snow's surface in search of decaying matter. Their dark bodies stand out against the white, tiny specks of motion in a still world. They, too, produce antifreeze proteins, allowing them to remain active when most insects lie dormant. In the leafless trees and frozen underbrush, small mammals stir. Mice, voles, shrews, and lemmings do not migrate or hibernate. They remain active, tunneling beneath the snow in a subnivean zone, a hidden world between the ground and the snow's surface. Here, the temperature is stable, insulated by the snow above. These tunnels become highways of survival, connecting nests to food sources, allowing movement without exposure. Voles create complex networks, storing seeds and grasses in hidden chambers. Their fur thickens, their metabolism rises, and they feed constantly to maintain body heat. Shrews, with their high-energy lifestyles, must eat every few hours. They hunt insects, worms, and even small vertebrates, using echolocation to navigate the dark. Their hearts beat rapidly, their lives burn bright, and they rarely live beyond a year. But in that time, they play a vital role of predator in miniature, shaping the balance of the undersnow world. Lemmings, iconic in their boom and bust cycles, graze on mosses and lichens. In good years, their populations explode, feeding owls, foxes, and other predators. In bad years, they vanish, leaving silence in their wake. Their survival depends on snow depth, food availability, and the timing of the seasons. They are barometers of the tundra, their numbers rising and falling with the pulse of the land. Some small mammals do hibernate. Ground squirrels, marmots, and bats enter deep torpor, lowering their body temperature to near freezing. Their heart rate slows, their breathing becomes shallow, and they live off stored fat. In this state, they are vulnerable. Disturbance can be fatal, but it allows them to survive months without food, waiting for the thaw. Bats seek out caves, crevices, and hollow trees. They hang in clusters, conserving heat, their wings wrapped tightly around their bodies. In some species, individuals wake periodically to drink or shift position. Others remain motionless for weeks. Their survival depends on stable temperatures and humidity. A sudden freeze or a warm spell can disrupt their cycle, leading to starvation or dehydration. Birds face a different challenge. Many migrate, flying thousands of kilometers to escape the cold. But some stay, adapting their behavior and physiology to endure. Chickadees, nuthatches, and woodpeckers remain active throughout winter, foraging for insects hidden in bark, seeds cached in crevices, and berries left on bare branches. Chickadees, in particular, are masters of memory. They store hundreds of food items in autumn and remember each location, returning when food is scarce. Their bodies adapt too. They grow extra feathers, increase fat reserves, and shiver to generate heat. At night, they enter a state of regulated hypothermia, lowering their body temperature to conserve energy. In the morning, they warm up quickly, resuming their search for food. Their calls ring through the cold air, bright notes in a muted world. Owls take advantage of the snow. Their hearing is so acute, they can detect the movement of a vole beneath the surface. With silent wings, they glide over the landscape, plunging through snow to snatch prey from the hidden tunnels. Their feathers insulate against the cold, and their eyes pierce the darkness. They are apex predators of the winter night, ruling the frozen forest with quiet precision. Corvids, ravens, crows, and jays are among the most intelligent winter residents. They cache food, solve problems, and adapt quickly to changing conditions. Ravens follow wolf packs, feeding on leftovers. Crows gather in communal roosts, sharing warmth and information. Jays hide acorns in autumn, returning to feast when snow covers the ground. Their adaptability is their strength, allowing them to thrive in environments that challenge others. In the wetlands and shorelines that remain unfrozen, ducks and geese gather. Some species migrate short distances, finding open water where they can feed and rest. Others remain in place, adapting to ice and snow. They huddle together, share body heat, and feed on submerged vegetation. Their feet are specially adapted to cold, with countercurrent heat exchange systems that prevent freezing. Their feathers repel water and insulate against wind. They are built for endurance. Even in the harshest conditions, life finds a way. Insects burrow, mammals tunnel, birds adapt. Each species has its niche, its strategy, its rhythm. The cold is not a barrier, it is a challenge, and these tiny survivors meet it with ingenuity and grace. Their lives are brief, often hidden, but they are the foundation of the ecosystem. They pollinate plants, disperse seeds, aerate soil, and feed larger animals. Without them, the web of life would unravel. As the ice ages came and went, these creatures persisted. They endured glacial advances, interglacial thaws, and the arrival of new predators. They adapted to changing landscapes, shifting climates, and evolving ecosystems. Their resilience is a testament to the power of small things, to the strength found in quiet persistence, in cleverness, in community. As you close your eyes and drift into sleep, imagine the rustle of a vole beneath the snow, the flutter of a chickadee's wings, the silent flight of an owl over a moonlit field. Picture the frost on a bat's fur, the shimmer of a snow flea on a winter morning, the memory of a jay returning to its hidden cache. Let their stories carry you into dreams of survival, of adaptation, of life lived close to the ground and deep in the heart of winter. This is the world of tiny survivors, fragile, fierce, and enduring. A world where the smallest lives carry the greatest weight, and where the rhythm of the seasons is written not in grandeur, but in the quiet footsteps of those who endure. The surface of the sea is locked in silence. Ice stretches from horizon to horizon, a vast, unbroken sheet that glows blue in the low light of a polar sun. Snow drifts across the frozen crust, and the wind moves in long, slow sighs. To the eye, it is a world of stillness, of cold so deep it seems to hush even time. But beneath the ice, life pulses in quiet abundance. The ocean, even in its most frozen state, remains a refuge, a hidden sanctuary where ecosystems thrive in the dark, in the cold, and in the deep. In the depths below, the water is not frozen. Salt lowers the freezing point, and the ocean's own movement keeps it fluid. Beneath the ice, a world unfolds in layers. Near the surface, plankton drift in slow spirals, catching the faint light that filters through the ice above. These microscopic organisms, diatoms, dinoflagellates, copepods, form the foundation of the marine food web. A bloom in pulses, responding to shifts in light and nutrient availability. Even in winter, when the sun barely rises, some plankton persist, feeding on detritus and chemical energy, waiting for the return of light to explode into growth. When spring arrives and the ice begins to thin, sunlight penetrates deeper, triggering massive plankton blooms. These blooms feed krill-small, shrimp-like creatures that swarm in vast clouds, numbering in the billions. Krill are the lifeblood of polar oceans. They feed on phytoplankton and in turn nourish everything from fish to seals to whales. Their movements shape the rhythm of the sea, rising to the surface at night to feed, sinking during the day to avoid predators. In the Southern Ocean, Antarctic krill form schools so dense they can be seen from space, a living tide beneath the ice. Fish adapted to these cold waters have evolved remarkable traits. In the Southern Ocean, ice fish glide through frigid currents with blood that lacks hemoglobin. Instead, their blood is clear, and they rely on dissolved oxygen in the water to survive. Their bodies produce antifreeze proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming in their tissues. These proteins are a marvel of evolution, allowing fish to live in temperatures that would kill most other vertebrates. In the Arctic, Cod and other species have developed similar adaptations, their metabolisms tuned to the slow pace of cold life. These fish are not alone. Seals dive through cracks in the ice, hunting for fish and squid in the dark. Their bodies are built for the cold, thick layers of blubber insulate them, and their blood carries oxygen efficiently, allowing long dives beneath the surface. Weddell seals in Antarctica can hold their breath for over an hour, navigating through labyrinths of ice to find breathing holes and prey. They use their teeth to keep ice holes open, gnawing at the edges to ensure access to air. Their lives are a balance between breadth and depth, between cold and survival. Ringed seals in the Arctic carve out layers beneath the snow, creating insulated chambers where they give birth and nurse their young. These dens are hidden from predators and shielded from the wind. The pups are born with thick fur and a layer of fat, ready to face the cold from their first breath. As they grow, they learn to navigate the ice, to find breathing holes, and to evade the silent approach of polar bears. Whales, too, find refuge beneath the ice. Bowhead whales live year-round in Arctic waters, their massive heads capable of breaking through thick ice to breathe. They feed on zooplankton and small fish, filtering thousands of liters of water through their baleen plates. Their blubber is thick, their bodies immense, and their songs echo through the deep. These songs are not just communication. They are navigation, orientation, and perhaps even celebration. In the quiet of the frozen sea, the voice of a whale carries for miles, a haunting melody in the dark. Other whales migrate to polar regions in summer, following the plankton blooms. Humpbacks, minks, and blues arrive in waves, feeding on krill and small fish, building fat reserves for the long journey back to warmer waters. Their presence is seasonal, but vital. They stir the water, redistribute nutrients, and connect ecosystems across vast distances. Their migrations are ancient, etched into memory and instinct, guided by stars, currents, and the pull of the deep. Beneath the ice, the ocean floor is a realm of mystery. Cold seeps and hydrothermal vents release chemical energy, feeding communities of tube worms, clams, and bacteria. These ecosystems are independent of sunlight, relying instead on chemosynthesis. In the darkness, life glows bioluminescent fish, jellyfish, and squid flash signals to mates, lure prey, and confuse predators. Their lights are brief and beautiful, flickering like stars in the abyss. The structure of sea ice itself supports life. Algae grow on its underside, forming green layers that feed plankton and fish. As the ice melts, these nutrients are released into the water, fueling blooms and feeding the food web. Ice is not just a barrier, it is a habitat, a platform, a nursery. Polar bears hunt on its surface, seals rest on its edges, and birds nest on nearby cliffs, diving into the sea for fish. Birds are part of this frozen tapestry. In Antarctica, penguins gather in colonies on the ice, raising their young in the brief summer. Emperor penguins endure the harshest conditions, huddling together for warmth, taking turns on the outer edge of the group. They dive deep, chasing fish and squid, their bodies streamlined and efficient. In the Arctic, puffins, guillemots, and kittiwakes nest on rocky shores, feeding on fish and returning to their chicks with beaks full of silver. Even in the coldest months, life beneath the ice continues. It slows, adapts, and waits. Some species enter torpor, reducing activity to conserve energy. Others remain active, feeding and growing in the dark. The ocean's refuge is not a place of dormancy. It is a place of resilience. It is a reminder that life does not need warmth to flourish. It needs stability, adaptation, and time. The ice ages tested this resilience. As glaciers advanced, sea levels dropped, coastlines shifted, and habitats changed. But the ocean remained. It absorbed cold, buffered climate, and sustained life. Its currents continued to flow, driven by temperature and salinity, connecting polar regions to the tropics. These currents transported nutrients, oxygen, and larvae, maintaining the balance of marine ecosystems. In the deep, ancient species persisted. Greenland sharks, some living for centuries, moved slowly through the cold. Jellyfish drifted in timeless rhythms. Sponges anchored to the seafloor, filtering water and providing shelter. These creatures are living fossils, unchanged for millennia, their survival a testament to the ocean's stability. Human eyes have only recently glimpsed this world. Submersibles and icebreakers have revealed the richness beneath the ice, the complexity of ecosystems once thought barren. We have seen the blooms, the migrations, the adaptations. We have heard the songs of whales, watched the dives of seals, and traced the paths of fish through frozen corridors. But this refuge is fragile. Climate change threatens the balance. Ice melts faster, seasons shift, and species struggle to adapt. The rhythms of plankton blooms change, affecting the entire food web. Breeding grounds vanish, migration routes become perilous, and the cold that once protected now recedes. The ocean's refuge is still a sanctuary, but it is under pressure. Yet even now, life persists. It adapts, evolves, and endures. The ocean remains vast, deep, and mysterious. Beneath the ice, in the cold and the dark, ecosystems continue to thrive. They remind us of the power of resilience, of the beauty of adaptation, and of the importance of protection. As you drift into sleep, imagine the quiet beneath the ice. Picture the slow glide of a seal, the flicker of plankton, the echo of a whale's song. Feel the cold water, the steady current, the pulse of life in the deep. Let the ocean's refuge carry you into dreams of survival, of mystery, of a world hidden beneath the frozen sea. This is the story of life beneath the ice. A story of fish, seals, whales, and plankton. A story of endurance, of beauty, and of the quiet strength of the ocean. The wind howled across the glacial plains, sweeping snow into drifts that buried the land in silence. Beneath the ice, beneath the weight of kilometers-thick sheets that pressed down on the Earth's crust, life seemed impossible. Yet even in this frozen world, plants endured. Not in abundance, not in lush forests or flowering meadows, but in fragments in sheltered valleys, in isolated pockets, in seeds that slept for centuries. The story of vegetation during the ice ages is one of quiet resilience, of survival against unimaginable odds, and of the slow, patient return of green to a world ruled by white. When glaciers advanced, they scraped the land bare. Mountains were ground down, valleys deepened, and soil was pushed aside or buried. In the heart of these ice sheets, no plant could survive. The cold was too deep, the light too faint, the pressure too immense. But the glaciers did not cover the entire planet. Even at the peak of the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, there were places untouched refugia, where life held on. These refugia were often sheltered valleys, south-facing slopes, or lowlands beyond the reach of the ice. In Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, the Balkans, and parts of Italy became sanctuaries for trees and shrubs. In North America, the southeastern United States, parts of Mexico, and isolated pockets in the Pacific Northwest offered shelter. In these places, forests retreated but did not vanish. Pines, oaks, and birches survived in reduced numbers, their ranges compressed, their populations fragmented. They grew slowly, adapted to colder conditions, and waited. Some plants adapted by shifting their ranges. As the climate cooled, species migrated southward or to lower elevations. This migration was not rapid, it took generations. Seeds dispersed by wind, water, and animals moved inch by inch, year by year, following the retreating warmth. In some cases, plants evolved new traits to cope with the cold. Thicker bark, smaller leaves, deeper roots. Others simply persisted as they were, relying on the protection of microclimates and the luck of location. In the tundra and steppe that spread across the periglacial zones, hardy vegetation took root. These were not forests, but open landscapes dominated by grasses, sedges, mosses, and lichens. The tundra steppe was a mosaic of low-growing plants adapted to wind, frost, and short-growing seasons. Their roots clung to thin soils, their leaves minimized water loss, and their life cycles were tuned to the rhythm of the cold. These plants fed the megafauna mammoths, bison, reindeer, and in turn were fertilized by their dung, trampled by their hooves, and dispersed by their movements. In areas where glaciers had scoured the land clean, vegetation returned slowly after the ice retreated. The first colonizers were often lichens and mosses, pioneer species that could grow on bare rock, extracting nutrients from dust and rain. These organisms began the process of soil formation, breaking down stone, trapping organic matter, and creating a substrate for other plants. Over time, grasses and herbs followed, then shrubs, and eventually trees. This process, known as primary succession, could take centuries or millennia, depending on climate, elevation, and the availability of seeds. Dormant seeds played a crucial role in this recovery. Many plants produce seeds that can remain viable for years, decades, or even longer. These seeds lie buried in the soil, waiting for the right conditions, warmth, moisture, light, to germinate. During the ice ages, seeds may have remained dormant beneath snow and ice, protected by layers of sediment and organic matter. When the glaciers melted and the soil warmed, these seeds sprouted, reawakening life in places long thought barren. Some seeds were carried by wind, drifting across frozen landscapes until they found a crack in the ice or a patch of exposed soil. Others were transported by birds and mammals, tucked into fur or feathers, dropped in droppings, or cached and forgotten. In this way, plants spread into newly exposed areas, recolonizing the land in waves. The speed of this recodify varied. Some species moved quickly, others slowly, but the direction was always forward, always toward the light. In alpine regions, plants adapted to extreme conditions. Cushion plants grew low to the ground, forming dense mats that trapped heat and resisted wind. Their flowers bloomed quickly, often within days of snowmelt, and their seeds matured rapidly. These adaptations allowed them to complete their life cycles in the brief window of summer. Some alpine plants developed hairy leaves to insulate against cold, or red pigments to absorb more sunlight. Others grew in crevices and cracks, sheltered from the worst of the weather. Wetlands also played a role in plant survival. In low-lying areas where meltwater pooled, sedges, rushes, and aquatic plants found refuge. These wetlands were dynamic, changing with the seasons and the movement of water. They provided habitat for insects, birds, and amphibians, and served as seed banks for surrounding areas. The organic matter in wetlands preserved seeds and plant fragments, offering clues to past vegetation and the resilience of life. In the tropics, vegetation was less affected by glaciation, but still experienced shifts. Cooler temperatures and changes in precipitation altered forest composition and structure. Some species retreated to lower elevations, others expanded. Tropical montane forests became refugia for many plants, preserving genetic diversity and serving as sources for post-glacial recodify. In South America, the Amazon basin remained largely forested, but its edges fluctuated, creating mosaics of forest and savanna. Fossil pollen records provide a window into these changes. Pollen grains, preserved in lake sediments and peat bogs, reveal the composition of past vegetation. By analyzing these grains, scientists can reconstruct plant communities, track migrations, and understand how species responded to climate shifts. These records show that vegetation was dynamic, responsive, and resilient. Forests contracted and expanded, tundra advanced and retreated, and plants adapted in countless ways. Some species went extinct, unable to cope with the cold or the loss of habitat. Others emerged, evolving new traits or filling vacant niches. The ice ages were not just a time of survival, they were a time of transformation. Plant communities shifted, ecosystems restructured, and the groundwork was laid for the modern landscapes we know today. As the ice melted and the climate warmed, vegetation surged forward. Forests reclaimed glacial valleys. Grasslands spread across deglaciated plains, and wetlands expanded with rising water tables. Seeds germinated, roots spread, and leaves unfurled. The green returned, slowly but surely, painting the land with life. Today, the legacy of Ice Age vegetation is still visible. In the distribution of species, in the structure of ecosystems, in the genetic diversity of plants. Refugia remain hotspots of biodiversity, harboring ancient lineages and rare species. Alpine and tundra plants still carry the traits of cold adaptation. Forests still follow the contours carved by glaciers. And seeds still lie dormant in the soil, waiting for the right moment to rise. As you drift into sleep, imagine the quiet persistence of a seed beneath the snow. Picture the moss growing on bare rock, the lichen spreading across a frozen slope, the first blade of grass piercing the thawing soil. Feel the patience of plants, the slow rhythm of growth, the resilience of life in the face of ice. Let their story carry you into dreams of survival, of adaptation, of green returning to a world once ruled by white. This is the story of plants under siege, a story of endurance, of transformation, and of the quiet power of life to reclaim the land. The wind cut through the valley like a blade, carrying with it the sting of snow and the scent of distant predators. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the frozen ground, and the cold was not just a discomfort, it was a constant threat. This was the world of the Ice Age, a time when survival was not guaranteed, and every breath, every step, every decision could mean the difference between life and death. For early humans, the struggle was relentless. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, the cold seeped into their bones, and danger lurked in every shadow. Yet somehow, they endured. They were not the dominant species then. They were one among many clever, yes, but vulnerable. Their tools were simple: stone blades, wooden spears, fire coaxed from flint and tinder. Their shelters were made from bones and hides, or carved into the sides of cliffs and caves. They wore furs stitched together with sinew, layered to trap heat, and they huddled together for warmth. The cold was a constant companion, shaping their lives, their movements, their very biology. Food was scarce. The land was locked in ice, and the growing season was short. Plants were limited to hardy roots, berries, and mosses. Hunting was essential, but dangerous. Mammoths, bison, reindeer, and horses roamed the tundra, but they were massive, powerful, and not easily taken down. A successful hunt could feed a group for days, but failure meant starvation. Hunters tracked prey for miles, reading the snow for signs, hoofprints, scat, broken branches. They moved silently, coordinated in small groups, using strategy and patience. Spears were thrown from a distance, traps were laid, and sometimes entire herds were driven into natural enclosures or off cliffs. But humans were not the only hunters. Saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, cave lions, and hyenas prowled the same lands, seeking the same prey. Sometimes they sought humans. A child wandering too far from camp, a lone gatherer bent over a patch of roots. These were easy targets. The predators were faster, stronger, and perfectly adapted to the cold. Humans had only their wits, their fire, and each other. They built watch systems, posted guards, and kept fires burning through the night. They learned to read the signs of approaching danger, the silence of birds, the sudden stillness of the forest, the scent of blood on the wind. Shelter was vital. Caves offered protection from the elements and predators, but they were not always available. In open landscapes, humans built structures from mammoth bones, stacking ribs and tusks into frames and covering them with hides. These shelters were low to the ground, insulated with moss and snow, and often shared by multiple families. Inside, fires crackled, casting flickering light on painted walls. The smoke curled upward, escaping through small vents, and the warmth was precious. Children clung to their mothers, elders told stories, and the group became a single organism breathing, watching, surviving together. Fire was sacred. It provided heat, light, and protection. It cooked food, hardened spear tips, and kept the darkness at bay. But it was not easily made. Flint had to be struck just right. Tinder had to be dry, and the flame had to be nurtured. Once lit, it was guarded fiercely. Embers were carried from place to place, wrapped in moss or bark, kept alive through storms and migrations. Fire was life, and losing it could mean death. Communication was essential. Language was still forming, but gestures, expressions, and sounds conveyed meaning. A raised hand could signal danger. A grunt could summon help. A rhythm tapped on stone could call others to the hunt. Over time, these signals became more complex. Words emerged, stories were told, and knowledge was passed down. How to track prey, how to find edible plants, how to treat wounds. These lessons were shared around the fire, etched into memory, and sometimes painted on cave walls. Art was not a luxury, it was a survival tool. Cave paintings depicted animals, hunts, and symbols. They were maps, prayers, and records. They taught the young, honored the dead, and connected the group to something larger. In the flickering firelight, these images came alive, dancing on stone, whispering of past hunts and future hopes. They were a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the need to make meaning in a harsh world. Tools evolved. Stone blades became sharper, spears became stronger, and clothing became more sophisticated. Needles made from bone allowed for tighter stitching, and layered garments kept the cold out. Snowshoes were crafted from wood and sinew, allowing travel across deep drifts. Sleds carried supplies, and shelters became more durable. Each innovation was born from necessity, tested by the elements, and refined through experience. Migration was constant. As glaciers advanced and retreated, humans followed the animals, the seasons, and the warmth. They crossed land bridges, climbed mountains, and navigated rivers. They adapted to new environments, deserts, forests, coasts, and learned to exploit different resources. In some places, they fished with bone hooks and nets. In others, they gathered shellfish and seaweed. They learned to use every part of the animal meat for food, bones for tools, hides for clothing, sinew for thread. Community was everything. No one survived alone. Groups formed tight bonds, sharing food, shelter, and protection. Roles emerged: hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, storytellers. Elders guided, children learned, and everyone contributed. Disputes were settled through discussion or ritual, and decisions were made collectively. The group was a unit, bound by blood, need, and trust. Spirituality took root. The world was mysterious, dangerous, and beautiful. Humans saw patterns in the stars, meaning in the seasons, and power in the animals they hunted. They buried their dead with care, placing tools, food, and ornaments in graves. They carved figurines, painted symbols, and performed rituals. They believed in spirits, ancestors, and forces beyond the visible. These beliefs gave comfort, structure, and hope. The struggle was constant. Hunger returned often, cold never left, and danger was always near. But humans endured. They adapted, learned, and grew. They faced the Ice Age not with brute strength, but with ingenuity, cooperation, and determination. They became masters of fire, builders of shelter, creators of art, and seekers of meaning. As the ice began to retreat, new challenges emerged. Forests spread, animals migrated, and climates shifted. Humans followed, exploring new lands, developing agriculture, and forming civilizations. But the lessons of the Ice Age remained. The importance of community, the power of adaptation, the need for creativity, these were forged in the cold and carried forward. As you drift into sleep, imagine the flicker of firelight on a cave wall, the crunch of snow beneath fur-lined boots, the distant howl of a predator in the night. Picture the faces of early humans weathered, watchful, determined. Feel the cold, the hunger, the hope. Let their story carry you into dreams of survival, of struggle, of the quiet strength that built the foundation of humanity. This is the beginning of the human story, a story of endurance, of innovation, and of the will to live. A story written in ice, fire, and the beating heart of those who refused to give up. The wind howled across the open plains, sweeping snow into drifts that buried the land in silence. The cold was not just a discomfort, it was a force. It crept into bones, froze water in skins, turned breath into mist and fingers into stone. For early humans living through the Ice Age, the climate was not a backdrop. It was the central challenge of existence. And yet they endured, not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were the most adaptable. Through fire, tools, and shelter, they transformed hostile landscapes into places where life could continue. Innovation was not a luxury, it was survival. Fire was the first and most vital breakthrough. It was warmth in a world of frost, light in a world of darkness, protection in a world of predators. But fire was not easy. It had to be coaxed from flint and stone, nurtured with dry grass and bark, guarded against wind and snow. Once lit, it became the heart of the camp. People gathered around it, cooked their food, dried their clothes, warmed their bodies. Embers were carried from place to place, wrapped in moss or bark, kept alive through storms and migrations. Fire was life, and losing it could mean death. It also changed the way humans ate. Raw meat was hard to digest, full of parasites, and often tough. Cooking made it safer, softer, and more nutritious. It unlocked calories, made fats more accessible, and allowed people to eat a wider range of foods. Tubers, roots, and grains that were inedible raw became staples when roasted or boiled. Fire also hardened wooden tools, smoked hides to preserve them, and provided light for work after sunset. It extended the day, expanded the diet, and deepened the bond between people who shared its warmth. Tools were the next revolution. At first, they were simple sharp stones for cutting, sticks for digging, bones for scraping. But over time, they became more refined. Flint was shaped into blades and arrowheads, wood into spears and handles, sinew into bindings. Needles made from bone allowed for tighter stitching, and clothing became more sophisticated. People learned to tan hides, to layer garments, to insulate themselves against the cold. Snowshoes were crafted from wood and sinew, allowing travel across deep drifts. Sleds carried supplies, and shelters became more durable. Each innovation was born from necessity. The cold demanded solutions. Hands needed protection, feet needed insulation, bodies needed coverage. Clothing was not fashion, it was armor. Furs were layered, stitched, and tailored. Boots were lined with moss or grass. Hoods shielded faces from wind. Every piece was designed for function, and every improvement increased the chances of survival. Weapons evolved too. Spears became more aerodynamic, arrows more precise. Hunters learned to use atlatl spear throwers that increased range and force. Traps were built from stone and wood, pits dug to capture large animals. Nets were woven, snares set, and bait used strategically. Hunting became a science, a craft, a communal effort. Success meant food, warmth, and tools. Failure meant hunger, weakness, and risk. Shelter was the third pillar of survival. Caves offered natural protection, but they were not always available. In open landscapes, humans built structures from mammoth bones, stacking ribs and tusks into frames and covering them with hides. These shelters were low to the ground, insulated with moss and snow, and often shared by multiple families. Inside, fires crackled, casting flickering light on painted walls. The smoke curled upward, escaping through small vents, and the warmth was precious. Children clung to their mothers, elders told stories, and the group became a single organism breathing, watching, surviving together. In forested areas, shelters were built from wood and bark. Branches were woven into frames, covered with leaves and mud. In tundra regions, snow itself became a building material. Igloo-like structures were carved from blocks of ice, their interiors surprisingly warm. In warmer climates, shelters were raised on stilts to avoid flooding, shaded with leaves to block the sun. The design always matched the environment. Humans learned to read the land, to use its resources, to build homes that fit its contours. These shelters were more than physical protection. They were centers of culture, places of rest, hubs of innovation. Inside, tools were made, clothes sewn, food prepared. Songs were sung, stories told, rituals performed. The shelter was the heart of the group, the place where knowledge was passed down, where bonds were strengthened, where identity was formed. Innovation also extended to food storage. In cold climates, meat could be frozen and preserved for months. In dry regions, it was smoked or dried. Fat was rendered into tallow, stored in skins, used for cooking and lighting. Berries were mashed and dried into cakes. Roots were buried in pits. People learned to plan ahead, to prepare for lean seasons, to ration and preserve. This foresight was crucial. It allowed for stability, for growth, for exploration. Water was another challenge. Streams froze, snow had to be melted, and clean sources were rare. People learned to collect snow, to store ice, to dig for springs. They used hollow bones as straws, carved wood into bowls, shaped stone into basins. They boiled water to purify it, filtered it through sand and charcoal. Every drop was precious, and every method of collection was refined. Communication evolved alongside these innovations. Language became more complex, gestures more nuanced, symbols more meaningful. Cave paintings depicted animals, hunts, and rituals. They were maps, prayers, and records. They taught the young, honored the dead, and connected the group to something larger. In the flickering firelight, these images came alive, dancing on stone, whispering of past hunts and future hopes. Trade began to emerge. Groups exchanged tools, furs, food, and knowledge. They met at seasonal camps, shared resources, formed alliances. This exchange accelerated innovation. A new spear design could spread across regions. A better shelter technique could be adopted by distant tribes. Ideas moved with people, and the pace of change quickened. Spirituality deepened. The world was mysterious, dangerous, and beautiful. Humans saw patterns in the stars, meaning in the seasons, and power in the animals they hunted. They buried their dead with care, placing tools, food, and ornaments in graves. They carved figurines, painted symbols, and performed rituals. They believed in spirits, ancestors, and forces beyond the visible. These beliefs gave comfort, structure, and hope. Innovation was not linear. It came in bursts, in moments of insight, in responses to crisis. A new tool might emerge from a failed hunt, a better shelter from a brutal storm, a new method of fire starting from a lost ember. Each challenge was a catalyst, each hardship a teacher. Humans learned by doing, by failing, by trying again. Children played a role too. They experimented, imitated, and invented. They tested tools, mimicked adults, and asked questions. Their curiosity drove discovery. Elders guided them, shared stories, corrected mistakes. The cycle of learning was continuous, and the community was the classroom. Over time, these innovations accumulated. The toolkit expanded, the shelters improved, the clothing became more effective. Survival became more secure, and exploration more feasible. Humans spread across continents, adapted to deserts, forests, mountains, and coasts. They became masters of their environment, not by conquering it, but by understanding it. The Ice Age was a crucible. It tested every aspect of human life. But through fire, tools, and shelter, humans not only survived, they thrived. They turned adversity into opportunity, cold into creativity, danger into design. They built a foundation that would support civilizations, technologies, and cultures for millennia to come. As you drift into sleep, imagine the crackle of fire in a bone-framed shelter, the scrape of flint against stone, the warmth of fur against skin. Picture the ingenuity of early humans, their hands shaping tools, their minds solving problems, their hearts beating with hope. Let their story carry you into dreams of resilience, of innovation, of the quiet brilliance that turned ice into home. The wind whistles across the frozen steppe, carrying distant echoes of bison herds and the low rumble of reindeer hooves on hard-packed snow. In the pale light of dawn, early humans pressed their faces against wind-chilled hides, eyes narrowed against swirling crystals, scanning the horizon for movement. They have learned to read this vast, silent landscape like the pages of a story. Every broken twig, every drifted patch of snow, every subtle depression in the ground speaks of passing life. Here, survival depends on understanding the tracks left behind by mammoths, reindeer, and bison, and on transforming that understanding into carefully orchestrated hunts that feed families and warm bones. Footprints are the beginning of the tale. At first glance, they seem simple indentations, ovoid shapes, pressed into snow or mud, but to the trained eye, they reveal weight, gait, speed, even the health of the animal. A heavy tread with deep heel marks could signal a mature bison bearing full-grown antlers, while a lighter, bounding print might belong to a reindeer calf following the herd. Mammoth tracks appear as enormous oval depressions, sometimes 20 to 30 centimeters long, spaced at intervals that speak of deliberate, ponderous movement. Hunters crouch low to the ground, brushing snow aside with gloved hands to expose the underlying soil, feeling its consistency, gauging how long ago an animal passed. A fresh track is still slightly damp around the edges. An older one has crisp, frozen ridges. In this frozen world, time is measured in hours and sometimes in minutes, each change recorded in the subtle nuances of a footprint. Beyond tracks, hunters follow secondary clues, droppings that hint at recent grazing, crushed vegetation that marks feeding grounds, broken branches bent to the weight of passing antlers. They observe the direction of animal trails leading to water-thin ribbons of unfrozen stream where thirst drives life even in bitter cold. They watch for signs of salt licks, patches of soil rich in minerals that draw herds like magnets. In late winter, when snow is thickest, small clearings form where wind scours away drifts. These spots often cradle lingering patches of grass or moss, drawing hungry bison and reindeer. By piecing together these fragments, hunters map the pathways of herds across hundreds of square kilometers. Armed with this knowledge, hunters prepare their weapons. Stone-tipped spears are more than simple sticks. They are carefully crafted tools honed for balance, weight, and penetration. Clovis points thin, fluted stones shaped from chert or obsidian are mounted on sturdy shafts of spruce or ash, their bases wrapped in sinew and pitched to absorb shock. Some points are designed for handheld thrusting, others for attaching to ladles, wooden throwing boards that amplify the force and distance of a spear throw. Yet throwing a spear at a charging mammoth is an act of desperation. Instead, hunters often adopt pike techniques. They brace a spear in the ground, tip upward, anticipating the momentum of an animal. When a mammoth charges past, its own weight drives the spear deep into flesh, cutting veins and arteries in a single blow. Test pits and replica experiments show that planted pikes yield far more piercing force than javelin throws, turning the animal's own power against it. Tools extend beyond weapons. Digging sticks carved from antler help unearth frozen bulbs and roots. Wooden scrapers clean hides into furs that will be stitched into warm garments. Bone needles thread sinew through layers of leather, creating trousers and gloves that trap body heat. Sled runners carved from bone or wood glide over snow, carrying meat and raw materials back to camp. Even the hearth's fire requires tools. Flint strikers produce sparks, tinder bundles cradle embers, and hearthstones maintain an even glow for cooking and warmth. Every artifact is born from necessity, refined through trial, and shared among the group. Hunting itself is a collective ritual of coordination and trust. A small band, perhaps a dozen individuals, divides into roles. Trackers to follow and guess animal movements. Drivers to guide herds toward ambush sites. Spear throwers to deliver the kill. Butchers to process meat and skins. Sentinels to watch for predators. They move in silence along ridges and through canyons, using snowshoes or padded steps to muffle footprints. When the herd is sighted, its dark forms emerging from swirling mist drivers fan out in a semicircle, keeping just out of sight. Hunters conceal themselves behind drifts or rocky outcrops, waiting while the wind carries their scent away from the animals. Reindeer hunts often employ a variation of this strategy. Seasonal migrations funnel herds into narrow valleys between ridges. Hunters spread across the valley's rim, closing off escape routes. With a coordinated signal, perhaps a drumbeat of wood on bone or a sudden cry, they move in unison, driving the herd toward the valley's end, where low ice walls or natural cliff faces await. At that point, the reindeer have few options. Some plunge over edges, their bodies piling in drifts below. Others join the massive animals pressed too tightly to turn. Spears and arrows find their targets at close range. The harvest can feed the entire group for days, and the hides and antlers become raw materials for clothing, tools, and shelter. Bison hunts require yet another tactic. These massive creatures can outrun humans, so speed alone is not enough. Hunters build corrals of stone piles or sharpened wooden stakes in strategic locations, on migration corridors, or near salt. Licks gathered in hidden drifts or behind low walls. As the herd approaches, a small party of drivers appears at one end of the corral, raising dust and waving furs to mimic wolves or distant riders. The bison, startled, flee straight ahead, their path directed by the concealed stakes. Panicked and unable to turn, they impale themselves or break legs on the barrier. Hunters then rush in, delivering the killing blow with spears and knives. The result is a communal feast. Tongues, organs, marrow, and lean meat shared among families, with surplus stored in snowbanks or buried in pits to freeze-preserve it for leaner times. Mammoth hunts are the most perilous. These giants stand up to 4 meters at the shoulder and weigh up to 6 tons. Stalking them requires intimate knowledge of herd behavior. Mammoths traveled in matriarch-led herds, with calves at the center. Hunters aim for solitary bulls during seasonal dispersals, or younger individuals temporarily separated by moats of winter ice. They set up ambushes near river crossings, salt licks, or thawed tundra patches. Pits sometimes 7 to 8 meters long and 2 meters deep are dug in soft ground, covered with lashings of branches and moss, topped with a thin layer of snow. When a mammoth steps onto this fragile cover, it plunges into the pit, its legs breaking through the branches. From above, hunters gather around the pit rim, thrusting spears into exposed flanks. It is a high-risk strategy. If the cover is too weak, the mammoth falls feet first and appoints its own rescuers. If it is too strong, the mammoth steps over it. Precision, patience, and luck come together in these hunts. Winter brings additional challenges. Daylight shrinks, temperatures plummet, and hunters must track animals through deep snow. They adapt by following frozen rivers and lakes' natural highways that animals use for migration. The ice amplifies sound, so hunters move low and slow, avoiding cracks. They follow tracks that cross the river, guessing which branch of the herd they belong to. Sometimes they wait at choke points, where a river narrows or a ridge drops to the frozen plain, because animals favor predictable paths when tired. Hunters sharpen their skills in reading not only footprints, but snowdrifts shaped by wind. A drift behind a ridge might hide a herd that paused there for food or rest. The cold is a trial. Hands clad in animal skins go numb. Sticks of firewood must be carried in bone-lined hide containers to preserve heat, and fires cannot be built too close for fear of smoke attracting predators or alerting prey. Predators are ever-present rivals. Wolves patrol the same territories, following both big game and the tracks of human hunters. They can sense a fresh kill at a distance of several kilometers, then shadow human trails, waiting for scraps. Humans counter with watch systems. One or two individuals sleep lightly near the fire, clutching spears or clubs, ears attuned to the slightest rustle. They keep torches lit overnight, casting eerie shadows on fur-lined walls and warning predators away. In the morning, tracks of wolves or bears that circled the camp are easily distinguished from those of humans' larger footpads, claw marks, instinctive patterns of approach. Still, sharing the land with these carnivores keeps hunters alert and cautious, instilling respect for the balance of life and death. Food storage is as crucial as the kill itself. Meat is cut into strips and dried on racks of wood and bone, kept away from scavengers. Fat is rendered into tallow and poured into bone containers, solidifying into a rich resource for cooking and fuel. Hide is scraped, cured, and stored for clothing and shelter. Bones and tusks are transported back to base camps, where workshops turn them into tools and art. Storage pits are dug into permafrost, lined with hide to keep contents frozen yet accessible. In some regions, communal caches are maintained near hunting grounds, ensuring that returning parties find supplies even after long expeditions. The knowledge of tracking and hunting is passed through stories and apprenticeship. Teenagers accompany elders on scouting missions, learning to trace a trail, sense when an animal has sensed them, and choose the right moment to strike. Songs and chants codify techniques calls that mimic reindeer blows on branches, signals that coordinate a drive, cautions about weather changes. These oral traditions weave practical instruction into cultural memory, ensuring that each generation carries forward not just skills, but the wisdom of place. As the seasons shift and the ice retreats, camps relocate. In spring, hunters follow the thawing rivers as they carve new channels through the landscape. Fish return to spawning grounds, offering another source of food, spearfishing through thawed holes, nets woven from sinew, traps set in shallows. In summer, small game ptarmigan, marmots, hares becomes more abundant, supplementing large hunt proteins. Women gather berries, roots, and mushrooms, preserving some for winter. The entire community moves in concert with nature's cycles, each member playing a role in sustaining life. Over millennia, these strategies evolve. Spear points diversify into smaller arrowheads as bow technology emerges. Dogs become companions, running down reindeer and alerting to danger. Boats made of wood and skins are used along ice-formed fjords to hunt seals and whales. Communal hunts transition into more individualized success, yet the principles remain the same: track, understand, cooperate, adapt. By the time humans spread into forests and temperate zones, the memory of these Ice Age hunts lives on in cave paintings, carved figurines, and those buried beneath the earth in kill sites. Archaeological digs reveal rows of Clovis points clustered around mammoth bones, layers of bison scapula pits, piles of reindeer antlers marking kill stations. Each artifact is a testament to ingenuity under pressure, to the bond between humans and the animals they pursued, and to the relentless creativity born of necessity. In the hush that falls after a successful hunt, when the last spear is cleaned and the final bit of meat is hung to dry, the hunters stand together beneath the glittering stars. Their breath clouds the air, mingling with the smoke from the fire, and they feel the pulse of life around them. The low moan of wind, the distant howl of wolves, the soft tinkle of melting ice in the dark. They are alive in a world of ice because they have learned to read its secrets, to move silently across its expanses, to turn footprints into knowledge and weapons into artistry. In that moment, they are not merely survivors of a harsh climate. They are masters of adaptation, carrying forward a legacy of resilience that will shape the destiny of humankind. The air inside the cave is still, save for the soft hiss of breath and the faint crackle of a resin-soaked torch. Outside, the Ice Age night stretches on for hours, the world encrusted in frost and silence. Within these stony walls, early humans gather in small circles, their faces lit by flickering light that dances across rough rock. Here, deep under the ice-choked sky, art blossoms, not in broad daylight, but in darkness. It is in these long frozen nights that the urge to leave traces, to transform stone into story, becomes a vital spark of humanity. Drawn by curiosity and necessity, these pioneers of image-making venture into narrow passages where daylight never reaches. They bring with them handfuls of charcoal, ochre, and powdered manganese materials gathered from distant outcrops, valued for their rich pigments. Using brushes of moss or strips of hide, they apply strokes of red and black to cave walls, coaxing animal forms into being. A bison's hump emerges in burnt sienna, a deer's slender legs in deep brown. Handprints, stenciled by blowing pigment through hollow bones, mark the passage of generations, each palm print a signature of survival. The cave of El Castillo in Cantabria offers some of the world's oldest evidence of this impulse. On its walls, red discs and stenciled hands date back more than 40,000 years, predating many of the artists of Lascaux and Chauvet. In the dim light, a hunter might stand before a faded red bison, its massive form towering over him. With a spark of charcoal, he brings the image back to life, redrawing what time has begun to erase. Such acts are more than decoration. They are acts of remembrance, of connection to the animals that feed and clothe the group. As they paint, the cave itself becomes an amphitheater of shadows. The flicker of torchlight animates the figures, making them move in and out of solidity. A pronged horn takes shape, then dissolves, only to reappear with the next breath of flame. This interplay of light and darkness deepens the meaning of each image. Painted deer seem to graze along vaulted ceilings. The muzzle of a bear lunges forward as if breathing the same air as its creator. In that luminous gloom, art becomes a bridge between the human and the animal, between the seen and the unseen. For generations, these caves served as stages for ritual and teaching. The long winter nights left ample time for shared stories, for passing on knowledge crucial to survival. Elders might use a painted reindeer to show the young how to track migration routes, or how the herd would circle salt licks. A row of horse heads could mark spawning grounds or seasonal changes. In a world of shifting ice and sparse resources, painting was instruction as much as expression. Symbols accompany the animal forms, dots, lines, and abstract signs, whose meanings remain elusive. Some academics interpret these as lunar calendars or maps of star patterns. Others see maps of herds and hunting grounds. Whether literal or spiritual, these motifs attest to a mind reaching beyond immediate necessity, exploring the cycles of nature and the rhythms of the cosmos. In the silence of the cave, the artist's hand traces symbols born of observation and intuition, drawing connections between earth, sky, and the human spirit. The tools of this art were remarkably sophisticated. Flint flakes were sharpened into engraving tools, capable of etching fine lines into soft stone. Brushes woven from plant fibers or animal hair held pigment for broader strokes. Blowpipes' hollow bones curved to deliver a controlled spray of paint allowed for subtle gradients and stenciled silhouettes. Each technique required practice and skill, a testament to the dedication of communities who returned season after season to add their marks to the walls. Creating these images was physically demanding. Painters crouched on cold ground, often in cramped spaces where helmets and gear had to be abandoned. The air was thick with smoke, making each inhalation a test of endurance. Yet artists persisted, driven by a force deeper than comfort. In the depths of the cave, where no wind could reach and the world above seemed infinitely distant, they found a sanctuary for the imagination. Children, too, left their marks. Smaller handprints frequent the lower walls, stenciled in ochre beside larger, adult hands. Their prints reveal early apprenticeship in the art, a family tradition of creativity and memory. In some caves, footprints are embedded in hardened mud, overlapping layers of paint, showing that young ones explored these spaces themselves, perhaps learning by imitation and touch. Seasonal migrations shaped the use of these subterranean galleries. In deep winter, when snow blocked the plains, families huddled close to the cave's mouth, hunting mammoths and reindeer that passed nearby. When the ice retreated in spring, painters ventured deeper, expanding the galleries into side chambers. Over millennia, maps of art accumulated strata of imagery that record climatic cycles, food sources, and the emergence of new animal species. The iconography varies from region to region, yet common themes emerge. In southern France and northern Spain, bison and horses dominate. In Italy and Eastern Europe, red deer and aurochs appear alongside stylized horse heads. Even on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, at sites dated to at least 30,000 years ago, hand stencils and animal figures record an independent tradition of portable and rock face art. These parallels suggest a shared motivation across vast distances, a communal search for meaning in a harsh world. Art was often placed in the most inaccessible parts of caves, where only the boldest could reach. Narrow shafts and steep passages were illuminated by flickering torchlight, transforming the act of painting into a form of ritual initiation. Emerging from these depths, painters carried fresh visions back to their families, their hearts marked by the journey between darkness and light. With each painting, early humans claimed their place in the natural order. They were at once observers and participants, wielding pigment to honor the animals that fed them, the seasons that governed them, and the spirits that guided them. In the long Ice Age nights, when the cold pressed in on all sides, art offered a warmth of its own, a communion of hand and stone, heart and image. Over time, styles evolved. The curves of animal bodies grew more naturalistic. The shading of pigment deepened to suggest volume and movement. Engravings layered atop paintings created palimpsests, each generation adding its voice to a dialogue in stone. Speleologists today can trace this evolution, following the handprint of painters across the millennia, from the earliest red dots to the last charcoal outlines. As the Ice Age gave way to the warmer Holocene, the role of cave art changed. Communities moved into open shelters, began farming, and built new kinds of structures. Yet the impulse to symbolize endured, blossoming into pottery decorations, carved figurines, and eventually into the art of settled civilizations. The darkness of the cave was replaced by galleries of light, but the original spark drawn in flame and charcoal remained at the heart of human creativity. Tonight, when you close your eyes, imagine the hush of an Ice Age cave, the scent of smoke and ochre, the rough feel of rock under a painter's fingertips. Hear the faint scraping of flint on stone, the whisper of woolly hides against cave floors, the echo of distant footsteps in the darkness. In that memory, you carry forward the story of light in the darkness, an echo from a time when art was both survival and sanctuary, a flicker of humanity in the endless night. The world hummed with the footfalls of giants. Mastodons flapped their ear fringes to swat away clouds of biting insects. Woolly mammoths, their shaggy hides dusted with snow, plucked frozen grasses beneath towering pines. Giant ground sloths, 2 tons of lumbering muscle, pulled down branches to feed whole forests. In the cavern valleys, saber-toothed cats lurked behind rocky outcrops, muscles coiled for the pounce. Wolves, dire and 10 times the size of their modern descendants, howled a chorus that echoed across the ice fields. Yet this world was not destined to endure. In the shadow of shifting glaciers and the silent tread of early humans, these creatures faced a reckoning that would redraw the map of life forever. As the last great ice sheets began their slow retreat, ice tongues melting beneath a warming sky, the planet entered a new chapter of volatility. Summer warmth crept northward, sending river floods roaring through thawed channels. Forests spread into tundra that had once felt endless under winter's grip. Meadows of wildflowers sprung up in sunlit glades where ice had gouged the land, but the thaw was swift and uneven. Some regions remained snarled in permafrost. Others swung suddenly from drought to deluge. Amid this drama, the balance that had sustained colossal beasts for millennia began to wobble. Across every continent, the megafauna Irae shared a common pulse. In North America, mammoths and mastodons thundered across the grasslands, their curved tusks shaping riverbanks and prairies. South America boasted giant armadillos and supper-sized ground sloths that dug pits by the hundreds. Eurasia sheltered musk oxen and woolly rhinos that grazed steppe grasses blanketed beneath snowfall. Even remote Australia was home to giant kangaroos and diproton marsupial behemoths the size of cars munching on sclerophyll shrubs. Each landscape pulsed with life adapted to extremes, tethered to the rhythms of ice and warmth. Yet the warming wind carried more than fresh air. It brought unfamiliar weather patterns, long droughts that browned grasslands, sudden cold snaps that killed saplings before their roots could take hold. Vegetation zones shifted uphill and poleward, compressing once vast habitats into shrinking sanctuaries. Where herds could roam freely, they now found their corridors blocked by rapid climate swings. Pools that served as watering holes froze deeper and longer. Rivers, once reliable highways, dried in summer heat. As food sources grew unreliable, megafauna populations fragmented into isolated pockets, their genetic reservoirs drained. Then came the hunters. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged from Africa into the Levant, traversed Eurasia, crossed frozen land bridges into America, and finally reached Australia on cunningly crafted rafts. These newcomers possessed tools honed by thousands of years of experimentation. Spear throwers that flung stone points with deadly accuracy, nets woven from sinew and plant fibers, traps dug into the earth. They carried fire to every campsite, forging warmth in the cold expanse and cooking meat that fed burgeoning families. Their migrations overlapped with the final chapters of the giant's story. For decades, scholars debated the culprit. Was it the abrupt warming of the planet that made environments too hostile for large creatures? Or was it human hunters whose quicksilver technology drove populations to collapse? The answer, emerging from sediment cores and fossil DNA, lies in the nexus of both forces. Climate change eroded megafauna resilience over centuries, shifting vegetation, spiking weather extremes, draining water sources. Into that weakening web stepped human hunters, adept at tracking herds, coordinating ambushes, and striking with spears and arrows. In Patagonia, for instance, Ice Age megafauna thrived for millennia. Giant sloths grazed leafy branches. Saber-toothed cats prowled the tundra. Archaeological layers show humans arrived thousands of years before any extinction, living in harmony with their massive neighbors. But when a rapid warming pulse swept through the region more than a degree in a single generation, plant communities collapsed and became disjointed. Within a century of that warming, the giants of Patagonia vanished, their bones buried in a thin dust of volcanic ash and changing soil. Similarly, in North America, Clovis hunters perfected stone points that pierced the thick hides of mammoths. Bison drove through natural choke points, became communal feasts. Mammoth drives ended in bounty that fed tribes for seasons. Yet as the continent warmed, grasslands gave way to rising forests. Mammals adapted to open plains found themselves hemmed in by woodlands. The Clovis technology, once novel, became ruthlessly efficient. Within a few centuries of human arrival, the continent's greatest beasts, mammoths, mastodons, giant beavers faded from the fossil record. Over in Australia, the story unfolds differently. Here human arrival coincided with environmental fluctuations, prolonged droughts, wildfires fueled by drying vegetation, and the disappearance of permanent waterholes. The local megafauna giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, and diprotodon had weathered multiple climate cycles before. But the double punch of changing climate and novel human predation proved fatal. Extinctions swept the continent, leaving only the smaller, more adaptable species behind. Africa's record contrasts starkly. There, humans and megafauna coexisted for hundreds of thousands of years, evolving side by side. Elephants, rhinos, and hippos survived into the late Pleistocene without wholesale collapse. Why? Coevolution. African species developed wariness of human hunting patterns, found refuge in dense forests and rivers where spear technology faltered, and survived social structures that could adapt alongside human expansion. Only with the advent of modern fences, firearms, and agriculture did true declines begin. In each region, the thread is the same. Climate change chipped away at habitats, splitting populations into islands of vulnerability. Human hunters capitalized on that fracture, using strategic knowledge of herds, seasonal movements, and kill techniques to exploit the last survivors. The synergy created a perfect storm. Nature's ease-weakening hand and humanity as sharpened spear-eroding megafauna to the brink. The mechanics of extinction varied. In some cases, overkill was rapid, a single species hunted to oblivion in a few generations. In others, local declines staggered over centuries, leaving brittle populations that never fully recovered. Jungles once grazed by giant sloths grew denser without large browsers to shape them, altering fire regimes and nutrient cycles. Meadows that fed bison turned to shrubland, closing the door on renewed grazing. Trophic cascades rippled through the ecosystem, extinctions begetting collapse in reciprocally linked species. Our understanding deepened with radiocarbon dating, ancient DNA sequencing, and high-resolution climate reconstructions. We now see that neither human nor climate explanations alone suffice. Each continent tells a mixed tale. Glacial warming events set the stage by reducing ice age floras. Megafauna moved into refugia, only to be cornered by human hunters. Secondary extinctions followed as predators lost prey and plants lost seed dispersers. The interplay of temperature, habitat, and predation drove the mass disappearances we now call the late Pleistocene megafaunal extinctions. These vanishings were abrupt on ecological timescales, but slow in human memory. Generations passed before some herds completely vanished. In lingering valleys, mammoths persisted on offshore islands for millennia longer, their remains whispering of resilience amid isolation. In Siberia, musk oxen clung to high tundra plateaus until climate shifted once more. Each remnant population was a testament to both fortitude and fragility. By the time human societies transitioned toward agriculture and settled life, the age of giants had ended. The landscapes were forever altered. Grasslands dominated by bison yielded to prairies grazed by herds, orders of magnitude smaller. Forests spread without the clearing power of mammoths. Nutrient cycles recalibrated without giant carcasses to fertilize soils. The Pleistocene epoch closed, and the Holocene dawned a world still rich with life, but missing the colossal forms that once strode beneath the Ice Age sky. In the archaeological record, that transition marks a boundary between deep time and recent history. Stone tools give way to pottery shards. Hearths yield charred grains instead of mammoth marrow. Burials include domesticated dog bones rather than dire wolf fangs. Human cultures adapted to new subsistence strategies, hunting smaller game, fishing rivers, tending crops. But the legacy of megafauna extinctions endures. Ecosystems forever changed, biodiversity depleted, and lessons etched in earth and bone. Today, as we face our own era of climate upheaval and unprecedented species loss, the story of Ice Age extinctions resonates with urgency. It reminds us that rapid environmental change, when coupled with direct exploitation, can precipitate collapses beyond recovery. Yet it also teaches resilience, the capacity of life to adapt, migrate, and sometimes rebound in novel forms. In pockets of wilderness where bison herds roam again and elephants shape African savannas, we see echoes of a world once ruled by giants. The footprints in ancient snowbanks may be gone, but their echoes remain in DNA, in cave paintings, and in the rustle of grass across modern prairies. By understanding the intertwined roles of climate and human agency in past vanishings, we gain perspective on the fragility and power of life on Earth. And perhaps, equipped with that knowledge, we can forge a path toward coexistence that honors both the warmth of our own ingenuity and the cold strength of the megafauna we once called neighbors. Around 18,000 years ago, the world began to warm. The massive ice sheets that once blanketed much of North America, Europe, and Asia started to thin and fragment as summer insulation rose. Rivers of meltwater gushed from the Greenland and Laurentide ice domes into perglacial lakes, surging across lowlands in roaring floods that reshaped valleys and carved new channels. In places like Montana and Canada, immense glacial lakes Agassiz and Missoula swelled behind ice dams. When these dams periodically failed, they unleashed cataclysmic torrents, scouring bedrock, snapping forests, and depositing thick layers of gravel and sand across vast plains. As the ice surrendered its grip, landscapes once compressed beneath kilometers of ice began to rebound. Rivers abandoned their old courses, and whole regions felt the slow upward push of the land itself. Sea levels responded in kind. With roughly 30 million cubic kilometers of water locked up in ice at the last glacial maximum, global oceans stood more than 100 meters lower than today. As ice melted, sea level rose at an average of about 1 centimeter per year, inundating continental shelves, drowning land bridges, and expanding the world's shorelines. The exposure of land bridges, most famously the Bering Land Bridge between Siberia and Alaska, vanished beneath rising waters, isolating populations of humans and animals and creating the modern outline of continents. Coral reefs that had built up along refugial platforms now drowned, falling into deeper water where light could no longer support photosynthetic symbionts. New estuaries formed where drowned river mouths pooled behind barrier sands, and salt marshes and mangrove forests spread into newly flooded coastal flats. The unloading of ice had deeper consequences beneath the surface. As the Laurentide ice sheet thinned, the North American continental plate, once depressed under the weight, began to rebound and shift horizontally. Geophysical models suggest that between 12,000 and 6,000 years ago, continental drift accelerated North America's plate motion, sped up by roughly 25%, while spreading along the mid-Atlantic ridge increased by up to 40%. The sudden reduction in ice mass altered stress patterns in Earth's crust, which in turn modulated mantle flow and plate movement. In regions like Iceland, which straddle spreading centers, melting Greenland ice may even have triggered volcanic eruptions as magma chambers responded to changing pressure regimes. At the same time, rivers reinvented themselves in response to isostatic rebound and meltwater pulses. In Scandinavia, which had been buried under the Fennoscandian ice sheet. Coastlines rose as much as 8 millimeters per year for centuries after deglaciation. Fjords that had been carved by ice deepened as sea level rise filled them, then gradually emerged as rebound outpaced inundation. Inland, proglacial lakes drained in a series of stepwise events, leaving behind strand lines, terraced shorelines marking former lake levels. Many of these drained catastrophically through spillways carved into bedrock, flooding downstream basins and dispersing sediment that seeded wetlands and alluvial plains. Across Europe, retreating ice sculpted the modern landscape. In the Alps, glacial walls steepened into cirques, while moraines ridges of till were stacked at former glacier margins, damming valleys to form alpine lakes. The Rhine and Po rivers adjusted to this new damming, carving canyons and reworking sediment into fertile valleys. Beyond the mountains, the northern European plain was littered with erratic's giant boulders plucked from Scandinavia and dropped hundreds of kilometers to the south. These glacial erratic stones became landmarks for Mesolithic hunters as they followed red deer and elk across the thawing steppe. In North America, the melting of the Cordilleran and Laurentide ice fields gave rise to a mosaic of proglacial lakes, Agassiz, McConnell, and Saskatchewan among them. As these ice-dammed lakes drained, they created spill channels that are today's Great Lakes waterways and the Minnesota River Valley. In some places, outburst floods gouged deep scour trenches, depositing layers of sand and gravel that now host prime farmland. Glacial Lake Missoula's periodic floods raced across Idaho's scablands, stripping topsoil from basalt flows and etching coulees hundreds of feet deep geological scars still visible today. While rivers and coastlines rapidly reconfigured, vegetation belts advanced. Tundra gave way to forests of birch and pine, which later ceded ground to oak and elm as summers warmed. Peat bogs formed in low-lying basins, their anaerobic depths preserving pollen, seeds, and insect remains that allow modern scientists to trace the northward march of plant species. As forests grew, they stabilized soils, drew down carbon dioxide, and further modulated regional climates. The interplay between deglaciation, sea level rise, isostatic rebound, and ecological succession created a dynamic tableau in which continents rewrote their own borders and habitats in lockstep with Earth's warming pulse. In regions where ice had scoured bedrock bare, primary succession proceeded in slow stages. Lichens and mosses colonized the fresh rock, secreting acids that broke down minerals and created the first thin soils. These pioneer species were soon followed by grasses and herbaceous plants, which added organic matter to the nascent soil. As soils deepened, shrubs and pioneering trees took root, shading out competition and building leaf litter that further enriched the ground. Over centuries, mature forests emerged, but the time frame varied widely. Tropical glaciers gave way to rapid reforestation, while boreal zones lagged centuries behind, constrained by shorter growing seasons. The meltwater-fed pulses of rivers also influenced human migration and settlement. For hunter-gatherer groups, retreating ice opened new corridors. Greenland's melt exposed coastal routes, and the Beringia corridor provided access into the Americas. Rising lakes and expanded river networks created fishing and trade opportunities, transforming nomadic bands into complex regional cultures adept at exploiting riverine resources. As rivers shifted, so did human pathways. Stone tool assemblages trace roots from glacial refugia into newly habitable realms, revealing how deglaciation reshaped not only the land, but also the course of human history. On the southern hemisphere's continents, deglaciation followed a different tempo but mirrored the north in its processes. In the Andes, glacial retreat since the last glacial maximum has exposed countless moraines, rock benches, and overdeepened valleys now occupied by lakes. Community sediments in Chile's Lake Lancashire record the waning of Patagonian ice, while radiocarbon dating of moraine ridges calibrates the rhythm of regional warming. Farther south, in New Zealand's South Island, glacial advances and retreats sculpted the fjords of Milford Sound and Doubtful Sound fjords, carved by ice and inundated by the sea, now enchanting visitors with mirrored reflections of steep rock walls. The glaciation also unleashed hazards. Rapid meltwater pulses sometimes triggered landslides and debris flows in steep mountain valleys. Glacial lakes dammed by unstable moraines burst without warning, creating Shkuklaps glacial outburst floods that devastated downstream communities. In Alaska and the Himalayas today, such hazards remain a modern echo of the processes set in motion millennia ago. Climate warming can destabilize sediment-laden slopes freshly exposed by melting ice, while moraine-dammed lakes grow annually larger, awaiting a trigger rainfall, seismic activity, or a sudden surge from upstream melt to unleash destructive floods. Volcanism responded to deglaciation as well. In Iceland, the rapid melting of the Greenland ice sheet 10,000 years ago may have spurred volcanic eruptions by altering crustal and mantle pressures. Elsewhere, isostatic rebound in formerly glaciated regions may affect magma chamber dynamics, potentially increasing volcanic activity in high-latitude zones. While human settlement patterns rarely follow directly into these dynamic volcanic terrains, the underlying coupling of ice, crust, and fire underscores Earth's interconnected systems that shape continents over both slow and surprisingly rapid timescales. By the midpoint of the Holocene, roughly 6,000 years ago, much of the planet had settled into new climatic and geographic configurations. Sea levels approached present-day highs, now covering most continental shelves. Modern coastlines formed, creating habitats for wetlands, estuaries, and coral reefs. Isostatic equilibrium continued in many areas, though uprights like Scandinavia and Hudson Bay still rise steadily today, humbled by the retreat of an ice load that melted over the late Pleistocene epoch. The geological scars of the Ice Age remain visible across continents. U-shaped valleys, hanging valleys, cirques, and roche mountainese stand as monuments to glacial carving. Drumlins and eskers trace the flow of ice, their gentle curves and sinuous ridges sculpted beneath moving glaciers. Erratic boulder strangers in the landscape sit in meadows far from their source, testifying to the transport power of the ice. Swarms of kettle lakes fill depressions left by buried ice blocks, creating a patchwork of water bodies that dot the post-glacial terrain. Even now, the processes of erosion and deposition, set in motion by deglaciation, continue to shape the continents. Rivers still adjust to the gradients, reshaped by isostatic rebound. Deltas grow or retreat with changing sediment supply and sea level trends. Coastlines respond to wave action and tidal regimes that exploit the new continental profiles etched by former ice. In the high latitudes, relict permafrost thaws, releasing water and altering hydrology, while meltwater from remnant glaciers feeds rivers and aquifers. As the modern world confronts anthropogenic climate change, the lessons of the end of the Ice Age resonate. Rapid warming then produced sea level rise measured in centimeters per year, as ice retreated and oceans rediscovered their full basins. The reshaping of continents through isostatic rebound, river rerouting, and submerged land bridges demonstrates the interconnected nature of ice, water, and rock. Today's ongoing glacier loss in places like Glacier National Park, where more than 80% of the park S glaciers have vanished since their 1910 survey, with projections of complete loss within decades parallels, past deglaciation in pace and consequence. Yet unlike the millennia of the Pleistocene-Holocene transition, modern warming unfolds at a rate unprecedented in human history. Geologists and geophysicists continue to refine models of deglaciation's impact on plate tectonics, volcanic activity, and sediment cycles. Paleoclimate reconstructions from pollen, ice cores, and marine sediments illuminate how climate variability drove the retreat of ice sheets. Ancient DNA from relict ice and permafrost reveals how plants and animals responded to newly available habitats. These disciplines converge to tell a story of transformation, where continents swell under melting burdens, seas rise to reclaim land, and ecosystems follow the shifting borders of ice and warmth. In the centuries to come, the contours of continents will keep adjusting. Land will rise in some regions. Coasts will erode or accrete in others. Rivers will carve fresh channels, and deserts may bloom or vanish as moisture regimes evolve. Just as the Earth reshaped itself at the end of the Ice Age, so too will it continue to respond to the forces of climate, tectonics, and biology. Yet the fundamental truth remains: continents are not fixed. They are living systems molded by ice, water, and time. And as we record the end of one great ice chapter, we glimpse the ever-turning pages of a planet in perpetual motion. Echoes of the Ice Age ripple through genes and behavior today, binding modern life to a frozen past. In the Arctic, polar bears carry within their DNA the legacy of ancient brown bears, diverging only a few 100,000 years ago, as ancestors learned to hunt seals on sea ice. Their fur retains the hollow shafts that trap insulating air, an adaptation honed when glaciers crept south and ice floes opened new hunting grounds. Beneath that fur, their blood transports cold-tolerant proteins, antifreeze glycoproteins, that prevent ice crystals from forming in tissues, a trait inherited from fish and amplified through mammalian evolution during glacial cycles. In Alaska and Siberia, Arctic char and whitefish thrive in frigid lakes, their enzymes optimized for low-temperature metabolism, just as their ancestors did beneath Pleistocene ice sheets. On the tundra, reindeer and caribou still march in great herds along migratory routes etched by Ice Age glaciers. Their hooves widen in summer to become snowshoe paddles in winter, a seasonal morphing guided by genetic switches that control bone and keratin growth. Their eyes, too, shift from gold in summer to deep blue in winter, enhancing contrast when days shrink to hours. These optical changes are driven by ancient alleles selected in herds that survived near polar darkness, ensuring that individuals with sharper winter vision could evade predators and find lichen beneath snow. Today, satellite tags and drones track the same migration corridors, paths first worn by Pleistocene herds, following meltwater rivers and dwindling forage across changing ice margins. Farther south, American bison bear genetic scars of glacial refugia. During the last glacial maxima, bison retreated into pockets in the southern plains, where grasslands persisted beneath rain-shadowed slopes. Those remnant populations, fragmented by ice, grew adaptational differences: shorter legs for better insulation, digestive enzymes tuned to tougher steppe grasses. When the ice retreated, bison expanded rapidly, their DNA reflecting a post-glacial population boom. Modern herds carry those expansions in their genome, and conservationists use genetic markers to identify lineages that survived the Ice Age as bottlenecks and preserve them against today's habitat loss. In the forests of Europe, oaks and beeches still show the imprint of glacial refugia in their genes. Pollen cores reveal that after the ice sheets withdrew, trees recolonized the continent from three main southern refuges in Italy, the Balkans, and Iberia. Those waves of migration left genetic Klein's gradients of DNA variation that echo from the Mediterranean to Scandinavia. Today, forest managers map these Klein's to source seed for reforestation, ensuring that newly planted trees carry adaptations for local climate and soil conditions etched during the Ice Age's thaw. Grasslands and wetlands carry their own legacies. Sedges and rushes in northern peatlands descended from tundra pioneers that colonized landscapes scoured by ice. Their genomes retain alleles for rapid spring growth and cold-tolerant photosynthesis, allowing them to burst into bloom during brief Arctic summers. In temperate marshes, cattails and reeds evolved from periglacial pioneers that exploited meltwater channels. Their rhizomes stabilize soils in seasonally flooded zones, a trait forged under the shifting patterns of Ice Age hydrology. Beneath our feet, soil microbes tell a quieter story. Permafrost isolates microbes that thrived under ice. Their DNA reveals metabolic pathways for slow growth at sub-zero temperatures. Some digest ancient carbon frozen for tens of thousands of years, releasing trace greenhouse gases as they awaken under warming conditions. These microbial lineages remind us how life persists in the margins, beneath meters of ice and meters of soil, waiting for the thaw that follows cold's dominion. Birds carry behavioral echoes of glacial cycles. The migratory pulses of snow geese, sandpipers, and Arctic terns mirror Ice Age pathways. Their instincts to fly along coastlines and through river valleys reflect routes once open between ice and sea. Genetic studies show that some species split into eastern and western lineages when ice closed off corridors, only to reunite as meltwater reopened them. Today's hybrid zones where eastern and western songbird populations interbreed are modern palimpsests of those ancient glacial barriers. In human DNA, the story of Ice Age legacies is equally vivid. High-altitude populations in Tibet, descended from groups that crossed the Himalayas after glacial retreat, carry a variant of the EPase-1 gene that regulates oxygen use under hypoxic conditions. That allele thought to have introgressed from Denisovans confers efficient blood flow at low oxygen levels, a survival advantage in thin air environments newly exposed by melting glaciers. Likewise, Arctic peoples possess mutations in FADSD lipid metabolism genes that enable high-fat diets without heart disease. Echoes of ancestors who depended on blubber and seal oil for calories when vegetation was scarce. Even our immune systems bear Ice Age signatures. Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, fragments secreted into Homo sapiens genomes during interbreeding episodes, include genes for skin keratin and pathogen recognition, traits that likely aided survival in cold, pathogen-rich landscapes near glaciated edges. Today, we inherit both their strengths and vulnerabilities. Alleles that once offered resistance to cold adaptive bacteria now predispose us to autoimmune reactions in modern, sanitized environments. Cultural traditions reflect glacial inheritance too. In northern Europe and Siberia, reindeer herding nomads maintain seasonal calendars that divide the year into 8 segments patterns of pastures, weather, and daylight continuity shaped by Ice Age seasonal extremes. Their dwellings reindeer skin tents, wooden huts partially buried in snow mirror Paleolithic shelters, optimized for insulation and quick assembly during migrations following herds. Speaking to the Ice Age's enduring impact, plant breeders tap into ancient alleles preserved in wild relatives. Barley, wheat, and rye strains with frost-tolerant genes alleles dating back to Pleistocene. Cold shocks are crossed into modern crops to cope with climate volatility. Potato cultivars carry variants for cold acclimation honed in Andean highlands that emerged from glaciated heights, while quinoa's drought and frost resilience echo adaptations to post-glacial Andes environments. Conservationists look to glacial legacies when planning wildlife corridors. Identifying genetic clines in species such as lynx, wolf, and elk reveals ancient refuge boundaries and post-glacial dispersal routes. By aligning protected areas along these natural pathways, they seek to maintain genetic flow and ecological resilience in the face of modern fragmentation. The echoes of the Ice Age remind us that life is a tapestry woven through cold and warmth, extinction and rebound. Our own biology, our crops, our wild landscapes, all bear the imprint of ice's advance and retreat. As we navigate a new era of rapid climate change, understanding these legacies offers both caution and guidance. Caution that swift shifts can outpace adaptation, and guidance that deep within genomes lie the tools for resilience. In every cell, in every behavior, and across every ecosystem, the ghosts of the Ice Age continue to shape the living world. A world that almost froze forever in the fiercest chapters of Earth's past, the planet teetered on the brink of a frozen silencing. Ice sheets, miles thick, crept across continents, pressing down on mountain peaks and burying forests beneath endless white. Sea levels fell by scores of meters, exposing vast plains where only moss and lichen dared to cling. Temperatures plunged, and life shrank toward the equator and into hidden pockets of warmth refugia, carved by geology, warmed by geothermal springs, or sheltered by wind-scoured cliffs. Yet even as glaciers gripped the land and nights stretched long, a flicker of life endured. Microbial communities under ice, seeds dormant for millennia, insects sheltering in rock crevices, and humans huddled in bone-lined caves. Their survival was not assured, but against the silence of a world grown cold, life found cracks to shine its resilience. Beneath meters of ice, bacterial mats persisted in pockets warmed by Earth's internal heat. Subglacial lakes, sealed from sunlight for tens of thousands of years, hosted communities of extremophiles microbes that fed on minerals and bedrock, eking out energy in perpetual night. Their cells produced anti-freeze proteins to prevent ice crystals from piercing membranes, and DNA repair mechanisms that countered damage from cosmic radiation filtering through kilometers of ice. When the ice finally retreated, these ancient microbial lineages emerged to seed new soils, providing the biological spark for plants to take root on freshly scoured rock. On the surface, life clung to every fragment of habitable ground. Lichens part fungus, part algae grew on bare stones, secreting acids that broke down minerals and laid the earliest soils. Mosses formed dense mats in wind-sheltered hollows, absorbing moisture from fog and retaining pockets of warmth against night's cold. These pioneers created microhabitats for insects like springtails and midges, whose minute bodies survived by entering diapause at arrested state of metabolism and by producing glycerol and other cryoprotectants. Each thaw, however brief, let them feed on decaying organic matter, fueling life's slow march forward. Seeds lay buried in periglacial soils, their coats impervious to freezing. Buried under snow or ash, they waited in suspended animation. When melting snow warmed the ground, seeds germinated in nutrient-rich drifts of low-as-fine silt deposited by cold winds. Early post-glacial meadows burst into life as wind-dispersed grasses and forbs raced to root in soils that had slept under ice for millennia. Insects followed, re-establishing pollination networks that would, over centuries, rebuild the tapestry of wildflowers across deglaciated valleys. The smallest vertebrates led the charge of repopulation. Cold-tolerant fish like Arctic char and whitefish swam into newly warmed streams, their blood containing antifreeze glycoproteins inherited from ancestors who survived past glacial cycles. Amphibians, notably wood frogs, hatched from eggs in tundra ponds, living briefly above ground before burying themselves in leaf litter or mud to freeze solid, then thawing joyously with spring's first warmth. Their annual resurrection spoke of life's tenacity in face of bone-deep cold. Birds claimed the skies. Migratory species, such as sandpipers and geese, followed exposed shorelines to feed on vast mudflats revealed by low sea levels. Other scrub jays, chickadees remained in forested refugia, catching seeds and berries in bark crevices. Their memory for stores, honed by decades of variable winters, ensured survival when snow covered the ground. In the long nights, they huddled in flocks, sharing body heat and passing on calls that mapped safe roosting sites across freezing landscapes. Mammals took refuge in circumscribed pockets. Lemmings burrowed beneath snow in the subnivean zone, drinking from unseen streams and gnawing roots. Their population cycles boom years, followed by crashes echoed plant fluctuations in a delicate dance of predator and prey. Stoats, owls, and Arctic foxes tracked their tunnels, learning to listen for the faintest rustle in the snow. Small rodents, like collared lemmings and voles, carried genetic variants that favored cold fur density and metabolic rates tuned to scarce food. These traits, fine-tuned by glacial hardship, survive in their descendants today. In the open tundra and steppe beyond the ice's edge, iconic megaherbivores persevered in diminished herds. Musk oxen, their curved horns shed each season and regrown in time for winter, moved like armored battalions across the plains. Their woolly undercoats kiviot were so warm they inspired the name for base layer garments millennia later. Reindeer, or caribou, migrated in great arcs, their hooves evolving wide, concave surfaces that doubled as snowshoes. Even woolly mammoths survived on isolated Siberian islands long after their mainland kin vanished, a testament to pockets of suitable forage and genetic diversity that buffered them from extinction until the very end of the Pleistocene. Human communities were the last to arrive, yet among the most adaptable. In the freezing nights, they sealed bone shelters with animal hides, built hearths that burned mammoth fat, and taught children the art of mammoth bone tool-making. They painted cave walls with charcoal and ochre, telling stories of hunts and seasons, mapping migration routes for generations to follow. By mastering fire, they transformed frozen carcasses into stews rich in calories, killing parasites and preserving meat through smoking. Their clothing layered furs with sinew-stitched seams, and their footwear, padded with moss, let them walk miles across icy plains. In frozen forests of Siberia, they hunted elk and horses with bows and arrows tipped in antler. In coastal refugia, they fished breathing holes in the pack ice, using bone hooks to catch Arctic cod. Their ingenuity in the darkest nights ensured humanity's place in the melting world that followed. Across the globe, life persisted not through brute force, but through interdependence. Plants, herbivores, predators, decomposers, and humans formed webs of survival. When a cold snap killed one species, another filled the niche. When vegetation retreated, seeds and spores lay dormant, ready to rebound. Genetic bottlenecks in struggling populations favored alleles for cold acceleration and resource efficiency. Gene flow among scattered refugia maintained diversity. Climate pulses that once spelled extinction became crucibles of adaptation, forging lineages that carried icy legacies into warmer eras. As ice gave way to warmth, ecosystems reassembled in new configurations. Tundra receded, forests advanced, and grasslands emerged in continental interiors. Wetlands expanded behind receding glaciers, offering habitats for beavers, ducks, and amphibians. Migratory corridors opened for birds, linking Arctic breeding grounds to tropical wintering sites. River valleys carved by meltwater became highways for humans and wildlife alike. In each habitat, the fingerprints of glacial sculpting, the U-shaped valleys, the drumlins, the kettle lakes remained etched in the land, guiding life's patterns for millennia to come. Genetic studies today still trace these resilient threads. Polar bear genomes carry signatures of past hybridization with brown bears when ice corridors opened, reflecting episodic gene flow during warming pulses. Plant species like the eastern hemlock display chloroplast DNA lineages matching Ice Age refugia south of the Appalachians. High-altitude frogs in the Andes harbor ancient haplotypes dating back to glacier-walled valleys. In every cell, life's history is encoded, a testament to survival amid extremes. The memory of almost frozen epochs reverberates in behavior too. Human traditions of seasonal movement, food storage, and communal sharing echo Ice Age lessons. In northern Scandinavia, reindeer herders still divide the year into sub-seasons, defined by daylight and snow conditions. In the Himalayas, yak herders migrate between valley pastures and alpine meadows as glaciers advance and retreat. In Amazonian riverine cultures, floodplain agriculture follows patterns first sculpted by Pleistocene pulses, as fish migrations align with seasonal pulses that persisted long after the ice melted. Today, as the planet warms again, these echoes hold vital lessons. Rapid climate shifts test modern species far faster than Pleistocene rates. Yet the legacies of adaptation anti-freeze proteins in cold water fishes, seed dormancy in desert plants, hibernation genes in bears offer clues for resilience. Conservationists prioritize refugia-high, latitude mountain slopes, deep caves, perennial springs, knowing they sheltered life through past extremes. Genetic rescue efforts draw on Ice Age survivors' DNA to bolster endangered populations. And anthropologists study ancient technologies for sustainable living in marginal climates. The story of life's near freeze is one of fragility and fortitude intertwined. It reminds us that existence is a constant negotiation with extremes, that survival depends on creativity as much as toughness. It shows that change, even when harsh and rapid, can yield new opportunities for diversification and growth. And it underscores that the resilience etched in genomes and landscapes is a resource we share in every seed bank, in every living gene, in every archived memory of human ingenuity. In looking back at Earth's coldest chapters, we glimpse a mosaic of struggle and triumph. We see the microbial pioneers that seeded soils, the first sprouts of green on rock, the animals that adapted flesh and fur to biting winds, and the humans who ignited fire in mammoth bone hearths. We witness extinction and renewal, loss and innovation, solitude and interconnection. Above all, we recognize that life's tapestry is woven with threads of both fragility and strength, threads spun in deepest cold that endure in every heartbeat of the thawing world that followed. And as we face our own era of environmental upheaval, these ancient lessons whisper through time. Seek refuge in diversity, adapt with ingenuity, cherish the links among species, and remember that resilience is born not in perfection, but in persistence against the elements. Even when almost frozen forever, life remains a beacon of possibility, a reminder that, in the fullness of seasons, survival belongs to those who carry the memory of ice in their bones and the promise of spring in their DNA. Conclusion. As the last shards of glacier ice melted into rivers and seas, the planet slowly exhaled, revealing a world reshaped by cold and time. Life endured these frozen chapters not by chance, but through countless acts of adaptation. Microbes surviving in subglacial lakes by feeding on rock, mosses warming shaded hollows, insects pausing their metabolism until thaw returned, and grasses bursting into bloom on newly exposed soils. Fish adopted antifreeze proteins in their blood. Amphibians learned to freeze and thaw with the seasons. And birds mapped migratory corridors laid bare by low sea levels. Mammals, from tiny voles tunneling beneath the snow to great herds of reindeer and woolly mammoths, carried genetic legacies that tuned heart rates, altered fur density, and even changed eye coloration to match winter darkness. Humans found refuge in bone-framed shelters and warmed their bones by firelight, painting cave walls with the animals that fed them, and encoding knowledge of tracks and seasonal cycles into stories passed around flickering hearths. They honed tools to hunt megafauna and crafted clothing from stitched hides, carrying embers on long migrations and sowing seeds in the earliest post-glacial fields. Across continents, life wove a tapestry of resilience. Plants recolonized moraines, rivers carved new valleys, and forests reclaimed the thawing plains. Genetic markers in modern species still echo the paths of Ice Age pioneers, guiding conservationists to ancient refugia and informing efforts to bolster biodiversity in a warming world. In the hush that follows our own moment of change, the legacy of the Ice Ages offers both caution and hope. It reminds us that rapid climate shifts can cascade through ecosystems. Yet it also shows how life's quiet ingenuity seed dormancy, microbial survival, flexible migrations can bridge even the darkest winters. As we drift into the night, carried on a new pulse of change, the endurance of life through ice and thaw whispers a timeless truth. No matter how fierce the cold, resilience takes root in every crack, in every cell, and in every heartbeat that dares to survive.